One day, my husband asked me, "Hey, how much money do we have in that vault?" I chuckled and replied, probably around $500,000 in total now. The next day, when I got home, I found signed divorce papers on the living room table, and both my husband and the vault were gone. My name is Helen, and I'm a 58-year-old working housewife. Despite everything, I still work hard at my job. You see, saving money is a hobby of mine. When I was a child, my mother opened a savings account for me. She told me that depositing money in the bank would make the numbers in my passbook grow, and I found that very enjoyable. I started by depositing just $1 at a time and loved watching it grow. Each year, when my savings increased by a few cents in interest, it was a delightful surprise to my young self. Being fond of money and how it works, I became a financial planner and gave advice on asset management. One day, a college friend told me about an old childhood friend who was in serious trouble due to debt. They asked if I could give him some advice, so I decided to meet with them. This old friend was a handsome man with a refreshing smile. My friend explained that despite his looks, he loved gambling and was struggling to make ends meet. I thought I might have some good advice for him. His name was Mark. As I listened to his story, he admitted he loved gambling, just like his parents, and had even taken on their debt. He seemed quite worried, and I found his troubled expression rather endearing. Because my friend had asked, I gladly agreed to help him. Looking back now, perhaps I had a bit of a crush on him, but I never imagined that this would lead to a series of troublesome events. Anyway, I advised Mark to consolidate his debts and reduce his monthly payments so he could manage his life somehow. Not long after, Mark and I started dating. My friend opposed it, saying, I wouldn't recommend being with him, but we went ahead and got married. I thought that getting married would help us face Mark's debt together. My income was pretty good for my age group, so most of Mark's income went toward his debt. I made sure he cut ties with his parents to prevent the debt from increasing further, and I gave Mark a monthly allowance of $500. When Mark decided to cut ties, his mother yelled, "Ungrateful child! I wish I'd never given birth to you." It's only natural for a child to repay their parents' debts. His father also said, "Where's that thieving cat? I can't rest until I give her a piece of my mind. You don't belong to us." My husband, exhausted from having to deal with my in-laws' debts all this time, finally told them, "Enough is enough. I'm not your ATM. I'm trying my best here," and came back to me. He finally felt relieved to be free from my in-laws, who constantly brought up their debts. Soon after, we had a son. Our son Kevin is handsome, just like Mark. He's my pride and joy. However, Kevin seemed to pick up on his father's lack of discipline and indecisiveness. Just as our son noticed, Mark's carefree character didn't change. He continued borrowing money from predatory lenders, dealing with loan sharks, and tricking friends into lending him money to gamble away. We went through a lot, but I managed to keep Mark in line over the years. After 23 years, we finally got Mark's debt down to about $10,000. We were almost at full repayment when Mark received a call from his parents. "Please help us," his mother pleaded. "Your father has collapsed. We're at the hospital now. Can you come?" "What? Which hospital? What's his condition?" Mark asked in a panic. "Your father suddenly collapsed, and we had to call an ambulance." His mother sobbed. "Mom, pull yourself together. What hospital are you at?" Mark left work early and rushed to the hospital. He messaged me, "Helen, Dad collapsed. I'm at the hospital now. I'm sorry I broke our promise and went to see my parents. I'm really sorry to hear that your dad collapsed. How is he now?" I asked. Mark sighed. "He had a minor stroke. His life isn't in danger, but he needs to avoid overexerting himself. Both my parents are feeling pretty low. I want to stay with them for a while. Is that okay?" "Of course, honey. I replied. Go and comfort them. Should I come too? No, it's okay. You're busy with work, and they might treat you poorly again, Mark said. I gave Mark a little extra money for hospital visits. They probably couldn't pay for the hospital fees. Since then, Mark seemed to visit his parents often. Each time, he took $200 or $300 from me. I guessed my in-laws were struggling financially and were taking a bit from Mark. It amounted to around $1,000 to $2,000 a month, but I let it slide for now. A year has passed since my father-in-law collapsed. Both my in-laws have aged, and I guess they wanted someone to lean on. My hobby, as always, is saving money. One day, I took out my bank book from the vault with a grin. Mark, who usually wasn't interested in me, stared at me and asked, "Hey, how much money do we have in that bank account you always look at so happily?" "It's about $500,000 now," I answered casually. But the next morning, I found a filled-out divorce form left in the living room, and both Mark and the safe were gone. As I was having breakfast, I couldn't help but smile. I knew Mark had been eyeing the money in the vault. Moreover, he had planned to take the entire vault. He's really not smart, but imagining him carrying the whole thing almost made me burst out laughing. We have a black cat named Luna, and we've installed a pet camera to watch her. Luna's adorable antics are the highlights of my day. I watch the camera during my lunch breaks, no matter when I look. My child is just adorable. One day, as I switched on the camera, there they were in our living room on a weekday, my in-laws and my husband, Mark. They were having an unbelievable conversation. "Oh, you're living in such a nice house, Mark. Having a good salary makes your mother so proud," my mother-in-law said, flattering my husband. "Indeed, I am proud," Mark's father added. "You know, I make a pretty decent salary myself, but Helen takes all of it, so I only get an allowance of $500 a month," Mark said. "Oh, you poor thing. You've been working so hard. Your mother understands," they consoled him. "I can't believe she takes all your salary and gives you only $500 a month. That's outrageous. You should be getting more. Why are you obeying such a tyrant like Helen? You could be living much better on your own. You're our pride, Mark. You could have saved hundreds of thousands by now, but she's just exploiting you. You poor thing." My mother-in-law began to sob. "Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. You guys are right," Mark agreed. "What is he talking about?" He seemed to have completely forgotten that I've been working hard to pay off his debt. I wondered what was going on inside their heads. In the past, Mark had been burdened with debt from his parents and had to give them cash every month, making it difficult for him to get by. Now, she has a bank book with tons of savings stashed away. "It's not fair that I only get $500, Mark complained. The moment he said that, my in-laws' eyes lit up. They exchanged glances. "So how much is in the bank book?" They leaned in eagerly, awaiting his answer. Last I heard, I think it was around $400K or $500,000, Mark said. "Mark, isn't that money rightfully yours?" they asked. "It might not match the effort you've put in, but isn't it money you should be receiving?" "Yeah, I guess you're right. I'm starting to think the same thing," Mark conceded. Despite his good looks, Mark is indecisive and easily influenced by others. I used to find this indecisiveness endearing and devoted myself to him wholeheartedly. We've managed to reduce his nearly $200,000 debt down to $10,000, yet it looks like he's being manipulated by his parents again, and they're about to touch my precious savings. Seeing this scene was so pathetic. I was at my desk at work, tears streaming down my face as I held my phone. I've been putting aside my living expenses for Mart, using his income mostly to pay off the debt. On top of that, I was providing him with an allowance of $500 out of my own pocket. Despite explaining this to Mark, it seems he's completely forgotten. What have these past 23 years been for? I felt so sad and pitiful. My heart ached as if I was drowning in my own tears. I felt like I was disappearing, on the verge of breaking, but I made sure to record the conversation and sent the data to my son. That day, I left work early due to sickness. I went to my usual bar and drank heavily, spilling out everything to the bartender. In such a state, the bartender comforted me gently. He casually said, "Why do you grieve for such a person? You did nothing wrong. There's no need to live for them. Live for yourself." At that moment, all my intoxication and love for my husband faded. "Thank you, sir. Next time, we'll share a pleasant dream." I went back home after saying that to the bartender. Entering my study, I began to think, how would I steal the bank book inside that vault? I couldn't even begin to imagine, but I needed to devise a plan. I will show them hell. They shouldn't underestimate me. I concentrated harder than usual. Gathering evidence was the first step. From then on, I frequently checked the pet camera every day. Then the ugly truths began to surface. My husband was bringing home a young woman during his supposed work hours. It seemed like he was bringing her over about 3 times a week. I couldn't believe I had to witness my husband's infidelity when all I wanted was to watch our cat, Luna. Luna also seemed to be scared and wouldn't show up. They ruined my precious relaxation time. No more than that. They betrayed me, which I can't forgive. One day, I'll punish them severely. One day, while I was working, I activated the pet camera. This time, it wasn't the woman my husband was having an affair with, but my in-laws were at our house again. "So, is everything arranged to take that bank book from Helen?" they said with an unpleasant grin. "You're smart. You must have thought of something, right?" "Yeah, I thought about it. I'm thinking of taking the entire vault. It'll be easy." "Hey, that vault is quite heavy. Are you sure you can do it?" "I'll be fine. I'll load it on a cart. Help me out, Dad." "All right. I'll assist you anytime." The safe weighed about 120 pounds, as I suspected. My husband Mark was good-looking but not very smart. I pledged in my heart once again to drag these people down to the depths of hell. "If we have that money from the bank book, we can go to the casino as a family. We can live as a family of 3 again." "That's right. Let's live happily with the money from that bank book. Right, Mark?" "Yeah, but I do feel a little bad about Helen. She was saving up so happily." "You can't be so weak-willed. We're doing this for your happiness, remember?" "Right. I'll be happy. Besides, you found a new wife, haven't you?" "Quickly divorce that woman. I have to divorce for her sake as well. I'll leave the divorce papers here." "That's right. We're waiting for the money from that bank book and the new wife." "So, I'm going to be divorced. Well, I guess that makes sense." I found myself strangely accepting. But just how down bad are these people for some money? I was sipping coffee at my office desk, recording the scene on my phone screen. I wasn't even upset or sad anymore. If they had such intentions, so did I. I was going to show them all hell. I was fired up, and then the day finally came. "Hey, how much money is in that passbook in the vault? You always seem so happy when you're looking at it." "Right now, there's about $500,000 in there." The next day, when I got home, there was a signed divorce paper in the living room, and both my husband and the vault were gone. I had a smirk on my face while having breakfast. I acted quickly afterward. I immediately filed the divorce papers and contacted my son. "Kevin, your father finally stole the vault. I can't believe he managed to carry it. It's so heavy." "Mom, I think it's about time you end things with Dad. By the way, did he take everything in the vault too?" "Actually, I moved all the money to online banking. The passbook is essentially worthless now. The most valuable thing might have been the safe itself since it was so heavy." Oh, by the way, I've already filed the divorce papers. Now, I'm thinking about filing a police report. What do you think? You should file a police report, and it would be best to hire a lawyer. Oh, right, a lawyer. I already had a private investigator on it but hadn't thought about a lawyer. Thanks. I'm cutting ties with that too. Kevin seemed exasperated. As Kevin suggested, I reached out to a lawyer through my private investigative contact. I handed over the recording from my pet camera to the police and the lawyer and waited. After a while, I received a call from my ex-husband. He sounded quite frantic. What the hell? The passbook is empty. What happened to the $500,000? You tricked me. That was my money. Where is it? Tell me now, or I'm going back to the house and abandoning your cat. Luna. You just committed theft and now you're threatening me. From now on, communicate through my lawyer, I said and blocked his number. I reported the incident to the police and sent the recording to my lawyer. Oh, what a relief. This is what I wanted to do. Karma is a real pain. I got a call from the police shortly after. We have caught the thief. However, the vault was damaged. It appears he forced it open. The things inside it were burned. My ex-husband and his parents learned that the passbook balance was zero. And apparently, they set the things inside the vault on fire. Even though it was his first offense, my ex-husband spent a few days in police custody. His parents were released with a stern warning. My ex-husband broke into the house he used to live in after he was released. Hey, open up! I've come back. I'm sorry. It was just a small prank. Let me in. Let's talk. You haven't filed the divorce papers yet, have we? We're still married, right? Don't make a scene in front of the house. This is no longer your house. I've already filed the divorce papers. We are strangers now. Leave now, or I'll call the police. You jerk. This is my house. Open up. Open up. I called the police when he started causing a scene. 10 minutes later, he was taken away by the police again. I then called my lawyer, explained what happened, and had him start the process of getting a restraining order. Afterward, I asked my lawyer to sue for emotional distress due to infidelity. The lawyer said we might not get much money from his broke family, but none of that really matters. I'm definitely going to demand alimony. It seems the reason he broke into our house was because he was discarded by his mistress and apparently wanted to get back with me. His mistress promptly transferred $10,000 in alimony and seemed to have fled. It seems they split after the vault incident. When the money runs out, so does the love. I'm sure he was enticed by my $500,000. My underpaid ex-husband, who still has $10,000 in debt, and his gambling-addicted parents seem to be struggling with daily life. He appeared to be living in an old single-room apartment without a bath, constantly quarreling among the three of them. This information came from my lawyer. My ex-husband pleaded, I can't afford to pay the alimony. Please reduce the amount. And my ex-husband, who got involved with the police, was on the verge of retirement but apparently got fired from his company. The elderly parents-in-law have managed to find jobs in cleaning and seem to be barely making ends meet. My ex-husband is now working 3 part-time jobs, but these 3 are gambling addicts, so no matter how much money they have, it disappears. There's no helping them. I had my lawyer tell them, no reduction. Stay away from her. If you're really sorry, show it with money. If he had stayed with me, he had planned to end the remaining $10,000 debt by the time he retired, but he fell for the sweet talk of his gambling-addicted parents-in-law at the end. How foolish. This $500,000 is an accumulation of my savings that I have started building from a very young age. I find it enjoyable to save small change. There's just something fun about updating the bank book. So, I think I'll start a new bank book. Right now, I'm living a relaxed life with my black cat, Luna. My son visits occasionally and tells me about his girlfriend. This time, I'm going to spend time for myself. I need to buy a new vault. One that's so big that a person can't carry it. Right, Luna? I am the happiest I've ever been.
My husband has been cheating on me. He's been showering his mistress with designer goods, and what's worse, he's been using my credit card to pay for these extravagant purchases. For the sake of our son, I've endured his behavior up until now, but I've reached my breaking point. I can no longer tolerate this. I have to take action, and the person who came to my rescue was the last one I expected. My name is Flora, and I'm 35 years old. I've been married to Adam for 10 years, and our beloved son Dominic turned 8 this year. I'm living my dream as a novelist, a career I've always aspired to pursue. My mystery series has a strong following, allowing me to secure several monthly serials, and my standalone books are also doing well, keeping me busy every day. At the start of our marriage, my husband had a job, but he stopped working as soon as I began earning. For the last 2 or 3 years, he's mostly lounged around the house, occasionally going out to play pachinko. However, today he changed into a suit, which was out of character for him. Something seemed off. Why the suit? I boldly asked him. Adam, it's unusual to see you in a suit. Where are you going? I questioned. My husband seemed startled but quickly composed himself. I'm going to a job interview, he responded. For what position? I asked. Well, it's for a job, obviously. I thought it was time for me to start working again, he replied. Good luck, I said, trying to sound supportive. He left the house, and I genuinely believed he was attending a job interview. I thought maybe he was reconsidering his priorities now that our son is still young and our future needed to be secured. However, he didn't return home until 1 a.m. I was up late working on a deadline, and when he finally stumbled in, he reeked of alcohol and perfume. He passed out on the living room sofa with his smartphone still in his hand. It was unlocked, and out of sheer curiosity, I decided to take a look. What I saw on his phone shocked me. To cut to the chase, my husband was cheating on me, and his affair was with my best friend, Delphine. They had gone to a fancy restaurant with a stunning night view that very day. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It was too much to bear. How could Adam cheat on me with Delphine? Didn't Delphine have her own husband? I trusted them both. The unexpected reality brought tears to my eyes. I knew I shouldn't wake my husband, so I held back my sobs. Evidence, I needed evidence. For now, I sent the proof of the affair to my own phone and decided to think about what to do next. The next morning, I casually asked my husband, who seemed to be behaving as usual, "Hey Adam, about yesterday." "Yesterday?" he responded, seemingly puzzled. You mentioned you had an interview, but you got home pretty late. I was just curious about what happened." My husband looked away, clearly trying to come up with an excuse. "Actually, I ran into a friend after the interview and we went out for drinks." "A friend? Who?" I pressed. "Just some guy, Flora. Do I need to explain everything?" He replied defensively. "You're right," I conceded, knowing he was hiding the fact that he had met with Delphine. His evasiveness only confirmed his infidelity. 1 month after discovering my husband's affair, I was still grappling with the situation. I hadn't confronted him about the cheating yet, knowing it would create a rift in our relationship. If I were on my own, I would have shown him the evidence of his affair and immediately sought a divorce. However, I couldn't bear to separate him from our son, Dominic, who was only 8 years old. Despite his frequent outings, taking advantage of my focus on work, this gave me the perfect opportunity to collect evidence of his infidelity. While he was out, I searched his room and found several unfamiliar receipts. It seemed he had been purchasing women's designer items, but there was no sign of them in his room, and he certainly hadn't given me any. There was only one conclusion. Adam had been showering Delphine with luxury goods, but where was he getting the money for that? He's unemployed and living off my allowance. I gave him a monthly allowance, but he likely doesn't have any savings left. Worried, I decided to follow him. During this time, I called my brother over to watch Dominic, without telling him about my husband's affair. I fibbed to my brother, saying, "Hey, sorry to bother you out of the blue." "It's no problem, but what's up? Why do you suddenly need me to watch Dominic?" "I just want to go shopping alone," I lied. "Shopping? You've never been one to shop in person. Don't you usually shop online?" Normally, yes, but today I want to buy something that's only available in store. Can you watch Dominic for me? All right, but don't be gone too long. Dominic gets lonely, he agreed. Thank you, I said, relieved. With my brother's help, I was able to set my plan in motion. I watched my husband walking arm in arm with my best friend Delphine. I knew what was happening, but seeing it with my own eyes was a painful shock. They were cheerfully entering a high-end designer store. Then I witnessed something outrageous. Is that my credit card? My husband was using my secondary credit card to pay the bill. I always kept my main card safely in my wallet, while the secondary card was left unattended in a drawer. My husband took the secondary card without my knowledge and used it to fund gifts for his mistress. Over the past few months, I've been making large purchases for work, such as monitors, keyboards, and even new furniture, causing the balance on the credit card to skyrocket. Both cards were linked to the same bank account, and with my busy schedule, I hadn't reviewed the details closely. This negligence came back to haunt me. Not only was he cheating on me, but he was also using my money freely. Any lingering affection I had for my husband had completely evaporated. Although I was partly to blame for not noticing sooner, I couldn't bring myself to forgive him. I took clear photos of the two of them together and went home, simmering with anger. For the next few days, I focused on plotting my revenge. I repeatedly checked his usual computer when he wasn't around, knowing he sensed his phone and computer, allowing me easy access to his communications with Delphine. Soon, I discovered that the two of them were planning a trip to Okinawa during the upcoming long weekend, a 4-day, 3-night getaway. This was my chance. I planned to execute my revenge during my husband's affair trip, but one obstacle remained: my son. Carrying out my plan without my son discovering his father's infidelity would be challenging. I decided to turn to my brother for help once more. Hey bro, sorry to bother you again, but could you watch Dominic for me during the upcoming long weekend? You mean for all 4 days? He asked, sounding taken aback. I have something important to take care of. His question made me uneasy. Before I could respond, he spoke firmly. Flora, stop trying to handle everything alone. Adam's cheating on you, isn't he? I was taken aback. How did you know? I heard it from Dominic, he said. Dominic? I repeated in surprise. Even though my son was young, he had picked up on his father's infidelity. I don't know if he fully understood what was happening, but he sensed his father growing close to someone other than me, and it was causing me pain. Dominic, in his innocent way, had observed the situation. I thought I was shielding Dominic from this, I murmured. It seems Adam's actions have affected you so deeply that even Dominic could sense it. Are you still considering staying with someone like that? But if I divorce Adam, Dominic will be upset, I started to say. But then Dominic, who had been in the next room, suddenly appeared. Mom, it's okay, I'm on your side. Dominic, are you sure? I asked, moved by his words. I don't need someone who makes Mom sad. As long as I have you, I'm okay, he said resolutely. Thank you, Dominic, and thank you too, bro, I said, grateful for their support. With the help of my son and brother, I made up my mind to take action against my husband without any hesitation. We began moving to a new home on the day my husband was set to leave for his trip with his mistress. My brother helped us, and we discreetly packed our belongings whenever my husband was away. The night before the long weekend, I decided to confront my husband and give him one last chance. He was visibly excited about his trip the next day, and I went straight to the point. Adam, what's with the suitcase? Why are you packing? He replied, Oh, this? I'm going on a trip with a friend starting tomorrow. A trip? Did you mention anything about that? It's a last-minute decision, isn't it? You're using the allowance I give you, I questioned. My husband seemed annoyed and tried to brush off my questions. Don't talk to me about it anymore, Aura. I couldn't care less about his excuses. I lowered my voice as I asked, Are you really going on this trip with a friend? My husband flinched at my tone, his shoulders tensing, but he still attempted to lie. Of course, you've been nagging me a lot. I see, a trip with a friend. Have a good time, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I could be fun regardless of whether he told me to be. Just don't overdo it, I said as I left my husband's room. To be honest, if he had come clean with me then, I was considering settling matters amicably, requesting alimony and child support, despite his infidelity. After all, there was a time when I loved him. When my novels weren't selling well, he supported me and kept me going. I didn't want to harbor hatred or resentment toward him. However, after everything he's done, I can't afford to remain calm. For the sake of my son and my future, I need to end my relationship with him. There's no point in holding back any longer for a man who continually lies. The following morning, my husband had already left for his trip. I opened the drawer and confirmed that he had taken my credit card as usual. I immediately contacted the credit card company, reported the card as lost, and requested an immediate block on its use. My son woke up and I greeted him, "Good morning." He responded with a beaming smile. "Mom, today's the day, right?" "Huh?" I asked. "We're moving to our new home today, right?" he said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Seeing his enthusiasm erase any lingering anxiety. "That's right, Monique. I've canceled the credit card, and now it's time to move." "Yeah, I'm excited for our new home," he said. Thanks to my brother's help, the move went smoothly. My son and I settled into our new home, while my husband's belongings were sent to a designated location. The next day, we were all relaxing at the new house with my son and brother. I got a call from my husband. "Hello? Flora, is that you? Could you transfer me some money? I've spent more than I planned, and now I need some extra cash." He likely couldn't use the card since I had frozen it, so he was asking me for money without directly mentioning the card. His request disgusted me. "Didn't you say you were going to stick to your allowance?" I asked. "Come on, don't say that. I can't enjoy my trip alone if you do that," he whined. "Alone? Don't you mean with Delphin?" I shot back. My husband seemed taken aback. "What are you talking about? Who's Delphin? What's going on with the card? It's pointless to play dumb. You're all over the place. Your lies aren't working," I snapped. "It's clear you've been cheating on me with my best friend Delphin. Did you really think you wouldn't get caught?" "This is what it looks like. It's not cheating," he tried to justify himself. My anger flared at his attempts to make excuses, oblivious to the presence of my brother and son. I didn't hold back, letting my fury loose on him. I had been holding in my anger for too long. "Stop making excuses. You have a family, yet you chose to have an affair with another woman and misuse someone else's credit card. Do you realize how low you've sunk?" "Flora, let's calm down," my husband tried to say. "Calm down? How can I stay calm when I'm talking to the person I despise most in the world? Let me make this clear. I have no intention of forgiving you or offering any help. You and the woman you cheated with can go straight to hell. Don't you dare show your face in front of me or Dominic ever again." I hung up the phone abruptly, cutting him off. Shortly after, Delphine, the woman he cheated with, called me. "Flora, what are you doing?" she demanded. "Delphine, long time no see. How's your trip with your best friend's husband going?" I retorted. "Shut up. Explain yourself." "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. You sent Adam's belongings to my house, didn't you?" "Yes, during our move, I had shipped my husband's things to Delphine's house, knowing she was the one he had the affair with. Since Delphine was married, her husband was naturally at home. I had done it on purpose, sending all of Adam's belongings to her husband along with a detailed letter explaining the situation. As I shouted at Delphine over the phone, nearly breaking the speaker, I expressed my anger. "Are you serious? My husband found out, and Isn't that expected? You're having an affair even though you're married. My supposed best friend did such a disgraceful thing. You're the worst. I'm incredibly disappointed in you." "Excuse me?" she responded, taken aback. "I think that's my line," I retorted. "You were the one having an affair with my husband. Do you think I'd forgive you for that? Who showed disrespect first?" "Flora, I wasn't serious. It was just a fling. There's no way I'd settle for a jobless loser like him. Whether you were serious or not doesn't matter to me. I'm divorcing him soon. Your affair is a fact, and I won't forgive you. I'll be demanding the maximum compensation from you, so be ready." "Compensation? What? I didn't agree to that. Why should I pay compensation? It's natural. You did something that warrants it." "Wait, I'm a housewife. I can't afford to pay compensation." "I don't care. That's for you to figure out. Maybe you can beg your husband for help, though that doesn't seem likely." "Wait a minute, Flora, please," she started to plead. But I cut her off. "Goodbye." I hung up on her and blocked her contact. I finalized my divorce through a lawyer and demanded compensation from both my ex-husband and Delphine. I claimed child support and the money he had spent on the credit card without my consent. Delphine, saddled with debt from the compensation payments, was served divorce papers by her husband and reportedly kicked out of their home. She tried relying on her family but was turned away. As a result, she's now working night shifts and struggling to make ends meet. My ex-husband attempted to lean on Delphine, but she blamed him for causing her divorce. The relationship quickly disintegrated, and they went their separate ways. As for my ex-husband, he's now juggling several part-time jobs just to get by day to day. Having been unemployed for so long, finding a stable job won't be easy. If he ever falls behind on compensation or child support payments, I won't hesitate to take action to collect what's owed. Meanwhile, my son and I are thriving in our new home. He's growing up fast, and each day is full of new experiences. I aim to continue showering him with love and shield him from any sadness. On the day we were supposed to start our honeymoon, he surprised me by giving me papers that said he wanted a divorce. He said he was taking his whole family on the trip, and if I didn't like it, we could split up. Inside, I was furious. Okay, fine, I thought to myself. But remember, I'm still free. He looked shocked as I stood there feeling triumphant. My name is Emma. I'm 35 years old, and I work at a real estate company. I really enjoy my job and feel happy doing it. I'm lucky to have supportive colleagues, but in my personal life, I don't have any specific hobbies and I've never had a boyfriend. I felt a secret worry growing inside me. All my friends were getting married by the time they hit 30, one after the other. I was one of the few left who was still single. Plus, my younger colleagues were leaving our company one after another, and it hurt every time. Then, I met Brian through a friend's introduction. He was 2 years younger than me and had a smile that made me feel warm and protective. He didn't talk much but always listened to what I had to say when we needed to make decisions. He made me feel like my thoughts mattered. Since I had no experience with relationships before, I quickly fell for Brian's personality. Our relationship progressed smoothly. When I brought up the topic of marriage, he simply said, "Okay, let's do it." Marriage involves making lots of decisions: the wedding, the honeymoon, finding a new home to live in together. It's a huge event in a person's life, so I wanted us to decide things together. But no matter what decision we faced, Ryan always let me take the lead. He never shared his own thoughts. He just agreed with whatever I said. Brian's personality began to seem unreliable to me, and I started feeling unsatisfied with him. Another thing bothering me was my relationship with my mother-in-law. She was completely different from Brian, not easygoing at all. She never listened to my opinions and always imposed her own ideas on me. "Emma, when you get married, you'll quit your job and focus on taking care of the house, right? You're not getting any younger, you know. If you don't hurry, you might not be able to have kids. Brian is working hard, so as a woman, you should focus on the family. It's a wife's duty to support her husband." These were the first things she said to me when I went to greet her. The husband works outside and the wife takes care of the home. She clung to old-fashioned ideas like this. The truth is, I earn more money than Brian does. He doesn't seem to mind, and he's even told his parents about it, but his mother doesn't seem to approve. A woman who earns more than a man isn't charming. Maybe you can't do any household chores, can you? A wife should cook, do laundry, clean, and take care of her husband's health. Can you do that? She said, looking down on me. You're right, it's definitely different when it's your mother-in-law saying those things. While it's not something to boast about, I can handle all the household chores because I've been living alone for a long time, and I don't plan on quitting my job after getting married. I want to prioritize myself just as much as Brian. But when my mother-in-law criticized me, Brian didn't stand up for me. Instead, he just nodded along with her. That made me feel uneasy about relying on him for the rest of my life. But then again, Brian is younger than me. Maybe he'll become more dependable as he gets older. If this marriage doesn't work out, I might never get married at all. My mind is torn between anxiety and desires, stuck in an endless conflict. But time doesn't wait, even when I'm troubled. There are so many decisions to make for the wedding. where to go for the honeymoon, arranging time off from work, and more. The to-do list keeps growing, and it's making me feel even more uneasy. I was juggling busy days preparing for both work and marriage. One day, I talked to Brian about our plans. Considering our work schedules, we can only take a long vacation at this time. So should we have our honeymoon during this period? I asked. Yeah, that sounds good to me, Brian replied. Both of us had similar quiet periods at work, so this was our only chance for a long vacation. But there was a problem with the wedding. The venue I've always dreamed of is so popular that it's booked for over a year in advance. In that case, what do you think about having the honeymoon before the wedding? I checked, and some people do that. If we have the wedding first, it will be another 2 years before we can go on the trip. If you're okay with it, Emma, then I'm fine with it too, Brian said. I thought Brian wouldn't object, but he agreed so easily. It seemed like he was accepting all my opinions without any resistance. While I did want him to express his own thoughts a bit more, I figured it was better than facing opposition. So whenever I got the chance, I kept moving forward with the preparations for our honeymoon and wedding. In the end, we settled on going to Europe for our honeymoon. I debated until the last minute between Hawaii and Europe. Hawaii was close by, and I figured we could visit there another time. So I chose to explore Italy and France, enjoying the beautiful streets and delicious food. I also wanted to check out the stylish accessories and maybe buy some special tableware since it marked the start of our new life together. After considering various schedules and destinations, I finished all the paperwork about a month before the trip. By then, I was completely excited. It was going to be my first overseas adventure, and I couldn't help but feel thrilled. My mind was consumed with thoughts about Europe, from buying travel essentials to planning our activities there. Because of this excitement, any lingering dissatisfaction I had with Brian had disappeared completely. Just 1 week before our honeymoon, Brian suddenly brought up a conversation. I was puzzled by Brian's unusual request. He rarely asked me for anything, so I was curious about what it could be. Could it be related to our trip? Did he find a place he wanted to visit? I was filled with anticipation as I asked him, "What's wrong?" Brian innocently made his request, saying, "I want to go to see Taylor when we're in Paris. Mom really wants to go there." I was taken aback. "Your mother-in-law?" "Wait, what do you mean?" I couldn't keep up with this sudden turn of events, but Brian seemed to think it was obvious. "Well, since everyone else is going, we'll all be together even during the trip, right?" "What do you mean by everyone? It's our honeymoon, so it's obvious that it's just you and me going." "But my mom thinks it's normal for the whole family to go," Brian explained. "First of all, I only made reservations for 2 people. You and me, Brian. The deadline for booking was 7 days ago. Today is the last day to register. Whether we go together or not, I only booked for 2 people, so it was impossible for the whole family to join. If you ask the travel agency, they might be able to sort something out," Brian suggested. I was stunned by Brian's statement when suddenly, the intercom in the house rang. On the screen, I saw my in-laws. Without any regard for my surprise, they entered the house with a load of bags. Ignoring my objections, my mother-in-law's eyes sparkled as she declared, "I thought I'd leave the luggage here since we're leaving soon. I'm so excited." Brian chimed in, "Just leave the luggage here," and began leading them into the room without asking for my consent. "Wait a minute." I tried to stop him urgently, but my mother-in-law shot me a sharp look. "What's the matter, Emma? I hope you're not suddenly saying you don't want to go together now." "I never agreed to go together in the first place," I retorted, but my mother-in-law paid no attention. "You heard it, she just said no, didn't you?" "But Brian always thought we would go together with you, right?" she asked, trying to flatter Brian. Brian simply replied, "Yeah," affirming her statement. Seizing on his agreement, my mother-in-law began to dismiss me. "It's normal for the husband's parents to go on the honeymoon. Don't you have common sense? I hope you won't ruin the trip with any unpleasant experiences since it's a special honeymoon. We want to make good memories, right? I'll make sure to teach you some common sense during this week before we leave. It's supposed to be a special honeymoon after all." I felt like everything was falling apart. My blood was boiling with frustration. "Mother-in-law, this is a honeymoon, you know. Normally, it's just supposed to be the husband and wife," I insisted desperately. If I listened to my mother-in-law's demands now, it would set a bad precedent for the future. I wanted to avoid that at all costs. However, my mother-in-law stubbornly refused to back down. Not only that, but she began to dismiss my concerns altogether. The husband's parents going on the honeymoon together is just common sense. I can't believe you don't want to be with us. I thought we were becoming a family, but it seems our ideas of common sense are different. You don't seem to like me, and nothing seems to match. How sad, she said, lowering her eyebrows in a fake manner. Her words, how sad, seemed to have a hidden smirk behind them. I was convinced she was deliberately trying to trap me. That's how sure I was. Even Brian, without questioning, started blaming me based on my mother-in-law's words. Emma, what's wrong with you? They're my parents. It's okay for us to go on the honeymoon together, right? It's not possible. We've already booked reservations for 2 people. Plus, I've never heard of families joining a honeymoon trip, I declared. Brian shouted angrily, as if looking for a fight. I never realized you disliked my parents so much, Emma. That's enough, just leave for today, Brian said, looking at me as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. As he spoke, a wicked smile spread across my mother-in-law's face. Why does he always take his mother's side without even considering his spouse's opinion, especially at a time like this? I wished he would support my views. Before I could react to his words, I found myself pushed out to the entrance. Just before the door closed, I caught a glimpse of my mother-in-law's smug expression. Left outside, I felt powerless. Why am I being portrayed as the bad guy? Why does everything, even this special trip, have to be ruined? Frustration and sadness consumed me, and tears began to flow. A few hours later, I received a message from Brian. I want you to see if it's still possible for them to join the tour. If not, we'll cancel this trip and find a tour where all 4 of us can go. Please think rationally. If you reconsider, we can sort it out properly. I don't believe I'm in the wrong. It seems like there's no reason for you to apologize or respond. Brian hasn't contacted you since his last message, and it's likely he's upset too. Time passed, and the day of your honeymoon departure finally arrived. Despite feeling unable to enjoy it in your current state, you had spent a month preparing for this trip, so you couldn't refuse. As you were getting ready to leave, the intercom rang, and it was Brian coming to pick you up. You hadn't seen each other since the incident, so you didn't know how to act around him. His arrival indicated that he still intended to go on the trip, but strangely, he didn't have any luggage with him. Instead, he handed you divorce papers. After hurting my parents, you still planned to go on this trip, didn't you? He accused. I'm taking my whole family on this honeymoon. If you don't like it, let's get a divorce. My mom said it would be better that way, he added, thrusting the papers in front of you. In that moment, you finally saw his true colors. You had thought he would listen to you and prioritize your feelings, that he was a kind person. But it turned out he didn't have his own opinions, and he put his family before you. That's who Brian truly is. As I came to that realization, my feelings for him began to cool down. Even if I were to marry him, I couldn't see myself overcoming the challenges that lay ahead and becoming a family with his mother-in-law. It just seemed impossible. Determined, I pointed at the divorce papers in front of me and said, sure, but remember, I'm still single, you know. Huh? Brian exclaimed, clearly surprised by my words. Single? What do you mean? Weren't you listening? We talked about going on the honeymoon but delaying the registration until the day of the ceremony. I made sure to get your permission, Brian. You didn't forget, did you? The marriage certificate is still in the drawer, and you even said, if you are fine with it, Emma, then I'm fine too. That's right, divorce or not, we're not even married yet. There's no problem with going on the honeymoon with my maiden name. Maybe you remembered my words. Brian's expression suddenly changed. But then he turned red and raised his voice in frustration. Are you out of your mind to give up on marriage just because of a honeymoon? Get a grip. I responded, matching Brian's intensity with my own strong voice. This is the result of me being rational. I've been so desperate to get married that I couldn't see reality clearly. I don't think I can be happy marrying someone who doesn't listen to their future spouse's opinions and doesn't support them. I'd rather stay single for life. Thanks for making me realize that. Haste makes waste. I keenly felt that this saying was true. Hey Emma, let's calm down and start over from scratch, okay? He looked like he was about to cry. His pleading voice trembled. But I won't be fooled anymore. I will break free from this guy. Without realizing it, I found myself shouting loudly at Brian. If you're so desperate for a family trip, why don't you go with your family of 3? But in return, you'll have to plan everything from the tour reservations to the itinerary all by yourself. After always relying on others, it's about time you experience the difficulty yourself. If you think you can handle it, go ahead, you indecisive man. I pulled out the marriage certificate from the drawer and tore it to shreds in front of Brian. His mouth hung open in shock at the sudden turn of events. Overwhelmed by my determination, Brian was completely taken aback. Do you understand how serious I am now? I refuse to have a future that's dark. It's over between us. Why don't you go back to your beloved mommy and cry to her, you mama's boy? Leaving a stunned Brian behind, I slammed the front door shut. Given his demeanor, he might actually go cry to his mother. I could easily imagine that happening. Afterward, I contacted the tour company to cancel our reservations. Since it was a same-day cancellation, we were charged 100% of the fee. I billed Brian for the entire amount since he was the one who ruined our honeymoon. It felt like the right thing to do. Later, Brian blamed me for the failed marriage and spread rumors about it to those around us. However, it seemed that no one sympathized with him among our relatives and coworkers. Instead, he started to be seen as an unconventional mama's boy due to his past actions and was disliked by many. When I told my parents about the divorce, they were initially surprised but quickly accepted it. Marriage isn't the only source of happiness. As long as you're happy, Emma, that's what matters. I couldn't be more grateful for my mother's words. As a side note, since then, my hobby has become traveling. I felt it would be a waste to let long vacations go to waste, so I embarked on my first solo trip. Going overseas alone was a bit daunting, but I enjoyed a relaxing time in historic cities I had always wanted to visit. Wow, being alone is actually quite enjoyable. Thanks to the historical adventure trip, I've started to fully enjoy solo traveling. Whenever I have time off on my next break, I'm planning to embark on my next overseas trip. I've begun a life where I won't let myself be controlled by marriage alone.
Charles's voice cut through the clamor of the kitchen, sharp and demanding like the edge of a cleaver. "Cynthia, bring me some tea now." I paused, my hand still submerged in soapy water. "Wait, I'm doing the dishes." His tone thickened with disbelief and impatience. "Stop that and bring me the tea quickly. Can't you follow simple orders?" Before I could reply, he interrupted. "What a useless wife you are." His words stung, but the next command came from Kelly, my mother-in-law, lounging in the living room with a slice of cake she'd pilfered from the fridge. "Make me some sweet coffee, please." Her eyes twinkled with mischievous delight, but it only deepened my frustration. I sighed, my gaze falling on the towering stack of dirty dishes. There were too many, but Kelly's demand left me no room to protest. "Leave them for later," she said dismissively, "just do what we say." Useless wife. Charles's words echoed in my mind, each one a lash against my spirit. I am Cynthia, 30 years old, a working mother, caught in a life that felt less like a home and more like a prison. My only solace was my 5-year-old son, who shone as a tiny beacon in an otherwise dim existence. We lived in Charles's parental home, an arrangement I had reluctantly agreed to, under the pretense of caring for Kelly after my father-in-law's death. At first, I sympathized with her grief, but it quickly became clear that I was nothing more than a pawn in her power struggle. No matter how hard I tried, cooking, cleaning, working, it was never enough. My efforts were met with scorn. "These sautéed vegetables and shrimp are so half-hearted," Kelly would sneer. "Cook it properly, from scratch." "I'm busy and can only make simple things," I'd explain, struggling to keep my composure. "That's why I hate back talk from a daughter-in-law," she'd snap. "Cook from scratch." Trapped in this unrelenting cycle of demands and criticism, I longed for a change, for the peace that always seemed out of reach. One day, I hesitated before asking, knowing the answer would be cold and dismissive. "So, you're a good cook, right?" Her response was frosty, sharp. "Why would I do housework when you're here?" Her words stung like a slap, and with them, the realization that I was truly nothing more than a servant in their eyes. Over time, they stopped acknowledging my presence altogether. I became a ghost in my own home, only noticed by my son, whose love was the only thing that kept me tethered to this place. 6 years passed under this oppressive cloud. My son was growing, but the atmosphere remained unchanged. Kelly, now 65, seemed to take a twisted pleasure in my misery. One evening, as I returned home from work, the weight of my reality finally sank in. I was invisible, my existence meaningless. I was a shadow in their lives, except for my son, whose recognition I cherished. The thought of losing even that was unbearable. I threw myself into cooking, hoping to stave off the creeping sadness. Sichuan chili chicken, crispy fish fillets, and beef and broccoli stir-fry. It was my attempt at normalcy, a glimmer of hope for a decent dinner, but Charles shattered the silence with a command. "Bring me the mayo," he ordered abruptly. I handed it to him, my frustration bubbling inside. His first words to me in days were not a thank you or even a conversation, but another order. It was the final straw. Then Kelly spoke up. "Clean the toilet, right now." I was stunned. "Yes, right now," she insisted, venom dripping from her words. Unable to contain my frustration any longer, I protested. "Don't say such things while we're eating. It's disgusting, just like your heart." Her eyes narrowed, and the argument escalated quickly. Charles intervened, demanding an apology, but this time, I stood my ground. For the first time in years, I confronted them, and the conflict reached its boiling point. I knew, then, that I had to make a change, for my son and for my own well-being. That night, I retreated to my room, filled out divorce papers, and presented them to Charles. His face registered shock, but within me surged a quiet determination. "I'm filing these," I said, meeting his gaze with unwavering certainty. For the first time in years, I felt as though I had stepped out of the shadows and was finally ready to reclaim my life. In the days that followed, the household simmered with harsh glares and biting comments, but amid the tension, I experienced a strange sense of liberation. One evening, while serving dinner, Kelly scoffed at the meal. "You call this food? Even a child cooks better." I swallowed my frustration and focused on my son's beaming smile. "Eat up, sweetheart, I made your favorite tonight." Charles, ever the sarcastic one, chimed in. "Oh, now you're the perfect mother, huh? What a joke." Anger stirred inside me, but I held my composure, determined not to let their cruelty break me. "I'm just trying to make a nice dinner for our son," I said, trying to hold on to my composure. Kelly scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Don't act like you're better than us. You're just a nuisance in this house." The tension at the dinner table was thick, as Charles continued to hurl insults. His words stung, but I stood my ground. "So, Cynthia, have you thought about how you'll manage after the divorce? You can barely run a household, let alone take care of your own life," he sneered. I looked him in the eye, unshaken. "I've been supporting this family for years. I'm not worried about taking care of myself or our son." For a brief moment, his smirk faltered, and I saw a flicker of unease pass across his face. Before he could respond, Kelly interjected. "Don't be ridiculous," she said sharply. "You rely on us more than we rely on you." The conversation shifted, and for the first time, we ventured into the one topic they usually avoided: finances. "You know," I said calmly, but firmly, "without my paycheck, this household would be struggling. I'm done relying on you. I'm ready to start fresh and take care of what matters, our son." Kelly's dismissive laugh echoed in the room. "We'll manage. We don't need your charity." But Charles remained silent, his discomfort palpable. His lack of response spoke louder than anything he could have said. Deep down, he knew I was right. The days that followed were filled with mounting tension. Kelly bounced between pretending to plead with me to stay and throwing insults when I held firm. Charles, however, retreated into himself, his usual arrogance crumbling under the weight of the reality. He was financially dependent on me, and that was something he couldn't ignore. Then, one afternoon, I overheard a conversation between them that froze my blood. "Leaving her is not an option," Charles hissed, his voice low and tight. "We rely on her money." Kelly's response was chillingly cold and calculated. "Don't worry, I have a plan. We'll make her life so miserable that she won't even think about leaving." The realization hit me like a slap in the face. They didn't care about me or our son. To them, we were nothing more than pawns in their game of control and financial manipulation. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of the situation settled heavily on me. A plan was beginning to form in my mind, a plan to fight back. If they wanted a battle, I would give them one. But this battle wouldn't be fought with words. I would hit them where it would hurt the most, their pride and their finances. The next morning, I took my first steps toward reclaiming my life. I set my plan into motion by reaching out to a sharp, No nonsense, lawyer. I want a divorce, I told her firmly, and I want to make sure they don't get more than they deserve. She nodded, her expression resolute. We'll make sure of that. You've been the primary provider, right? We'll use that. With each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I started documenting everything, the insults, the financial manipulation, and even the smallest grievances. It was time to make them accountable, to show them that their actions would have consequences. I was no longer just trying to survive. I was fighting back. This was about reclaiming my life and securing a better future for my son. As I collected the evidence, a newfound strength began to rise within me. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my own life. The cloud of disrespect that had hung over me for so long was starting to lift, replaced by the promise of a fresh start. But as the divorce proceedings began, the tension at home only escalated. Despite that, I no longer feared their tactics. Each day, my determination solidified, and the doubts that once clouded my mind began to fade away. One evening, Kelly tried a different approach. Her voice oozed with false sweetness. Cynthia, dear, why don't we forget all this unpleasantness? You know we're family. I met her gaze, unwavering. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me. Charles, who had been quiet until then, scoffed dismissively. Oh, now you're the victim. You're not as innocent as you pretend. Despite the rising anger inside me, I kept my voice steady. I'm not pretending anything, Charles. I simply refuse to be your punching bag any longer. I knew the conversation would eventually turn to money, and sure enough, it did. You think you can just take our son and leave? How will you support him? Charles sneered. I answered with calm confidence. I've been supporting this family for years. I'll manage. Kelly sneered, her words dripping with contempt. You're nothing without us. You'll come crawling back, begging to return. Their words no longer had power over me. I had come to understand my worth, and I knew the truth of our situation. The following day, I met with my lawyer again, and she laid out our strategy with precision. We'll highlight their financial dependence on you, she said. That'll be key in the custody battle and asset division. I nodded, feeling a sense of validation and support. The legal system was on my side, and I was fully prepared to assert my rights. At home, tensions reached new heights. Kelly's attempts to belittle and intimidate me became more desperate. One evening, her voice was laced with venom. You think you're clever? Standing tall, I didn't flinch. I had already seen their true colors, and I was ready to move on. Armed with evidence, legal support, and a renewed sense of self-worth, I faced Kelly's accusing glare. She spat, but you're just abandoning your family. I looked her in the eye, my resolve unshaken. No, I'm finally standing up for myself. Charles, his voice seething with anger, chimed in. You'll regret this. You can't survive without me. But his threats were hollow now. They no longer had power over me. I had moved beyond fear. As the court date drew closer, I prepared for the legal battle ahead. I organized financial records, documented their spiteful comments, and compiled evidence of their neglect. One quiet afternoon, as I sorted through my papers, my son came to me, his voice filled with uncertainty. Mom, are we going to be okay? I pulled him into a tight, protective embrace. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. We're leaving this place and starting a new, happy life. Just you and me. His arms tightened around me, and in that moment, I knew with complete certainty that I was doing the right thing. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for my son's future. The day of the court hearing finally arrived, bringing with it a mix of dread and anticipation. I was ready to face Charles and Kelly, to finally break free from their control and manipulation, determined to reclaim my life. I was committed to securing the peace and happiness my son deserved. This day was about justice, and I was resolute in seeing it through. Sitting across from Charles and Kelly in the courtroom, a surreal mix of emotions washed over me. This was the moment of change, the end of their reign. As the proceedings began, Charles's lawyer painted him as a devoted husband and father, falsely accused, while Kelly cast herself as a grieving mother-in-law, wronged by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. But I was ready, armed with evidence and a newfound resolve. I was prepared to expose the truth and move forward. Their performances were transparent, their lies blatant. When it was my turn to speak, I did so with clarity and composure. For years, I've been the sole breadwinner in this family, while my husband's unemployment and his mother's manipulation have only worsened our struggles. Charles interrupted, feigning hurt. Cynthia, how can you say such things? I met his gaze unflinchingly. Support isn't about words, Charles. It's measured by actions, and yours have been nothing but selfish and cruel." The judge listened intently as I presented my case, financial records, audio recordings of their verbal attacks, and testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed their behavior. Each piece of evidence chipped away at Charles's self-righteousness, and Kelly's calm facade crumbled, revealing her true nature. The room fell silent as my lawyer introduced the final blow: photographs and documents revealing Charles's infidelity, as well as Kelly's secret affair with a neighbor. "Jacob," gasps filled the air, and Charles's eyes widened in disbelief. Kelly's face twisted in fury. "You violated our privacy," she screamed. I met her glare without hesitation. "No, I merely uncovered the truth, a truth you both tried to hide for far too long." The judge called for order, but their credibility had been shattered. The damage was irreversible. The court's ruling came swiftly. I was awarded full custody of our son, and the assets were divided equitably. Charles and Kelly were left with nothing but their shattered reputations. As I left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The years of manipulation and mistreatment were finally over. I had stood up for myself, and I had won. This victory wasn't just for me, it was for my son's future, for a new life free from their shadow. The most triumphant moment came just outside the courthouse when my son ran to me, his face beaming with relief. "We did it, Ma," he exclaimed. "Yes, we did," I replied, pulling him into a tight embrace. "We're free now. This is just the beginning for us." As we walked away together, I felt an overwhelming sense of victory. This wasn't just a win for me, it was a win for anyone who has ever felt powerless. It was a victory for truth, for fairness, and it marked the start of a new chapter filled with hope and the promise of a better future. In the days that followed, news of Charles and Kelly's deceit spread quickly through our tight-knit community, tarnishing their reputations. They could no longer maintain their facade of respectability. I focused on rebuilding my life with my son, but I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction knowing that Charles and Kelly were finally facing the consequences of their actions. One evening, as I prepared dinner, an unexpected visitor arrived at my door. Hannah, Jacob's wife. Her eyes were filled with tears. "Cynthia, I've heard everything. I can't believe what Kelly did." I invited her in, and over tea, she shared her heartbreak. I trusted her, as a neighbor, as a friend, to think she was having an affair with my husband. I listened, offering comfort, realizing just how deeply Kelly's betrayal had reached. The next day, I crossed paths with Charles in town. He looked defeated, a shadow of the man he once was. His arrogance was gone. "What's left to say, Charles?" I asked. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "I'm sorry for everything," he murmured. His apology was weak, but it marked a shift. He finally recognized how much he had depended on me, how much he had taken for granted. But it was Kelly who bore the brunt of the fallout. Her affair with Jacob didn't just destroy her reputation, it led to serious legal trouble. Hannah filed for divorce and sued her for alienation of affection, adding a legal stain to Kelly's scandal. The whispers through our neighborhood painted a vivid picture of Kelly's downfall, of a woman undone by her own misdeeds. She became an outcast, shunned by the very people she had once considered her friends. One afternoon, I saw her at the grocery store. She moved quickly down the aisles, trying to avoid attention. Our paths crossed, and our eyes met. The resentment and defeat in her gaze were unmistakable. "You did this to me," she hissed as she passed. I watched her retreat, a complex mix of pity and vindication rising within me. "No, Kelly," I whispered to myself, "you did this to yourself." The tables had turned. The consequences of their actions were now unavoidable. Charles and Kelly were finally facing the repercussions of their years of deceit and manipulation. As I focused on my son and our fresh start, I realized that the greatest form of revenge was simply living well, free from the toxicity that had once overshadowed my life. This journey wasn't about vengeance, it was about freedom, breaking free from the cycles of abuse and control that had bound us. Looking ahead, I felt nothing but hope. This new chapter wasn't just a twist of fate, it was a well-earned beginning, full of possibilities and free from the shadows that once loomed so large. Shouldn't you be helping more around the house? If this is the kind of spouse you're going to be, maybe it's better if you leave. My mother-in-law's sharp words cut through the room. her piercing stare leaving no room for misinterpretation. Stunned by her harshness, I glanced at my sister-in-law, who added dismissively, "You always look exhausted and never seem to get anything done." Feeling overwhelmed, I turned to my husband, Matthew, hoping for support. "This is too much. Don't you think your mom and sister are being unfair?" I asked, my voice trembling, but Matthew's response only deepened the blow. "I agree with them," he said bluntly. "I'm swamped with work, and it's a problem that you're not contributing more at home. Things are running smoothly with the new part-time worker at the cafe, and honestly, you're just slowing us down. Maybe you should consider staying somewhere else." His words felt like a slap. I looked at the three of them, their judgment bearing down on me. Anger surged within me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Taking a deep breath, I replied, "I need time to think. My name is Lori, and I'm 35 years old. Balancing my career and household responsibilities has always been a priority for me. Like many women, I juggle work and family life, striving to excel at both. I love my job and take pride in the company I joined straight out of college." One morning, as I prepared for work, Matthew approached me with a file stuffed with receipts and bills. "Lori, can you handle this? The cafe's finances are a mess," he said, looking exasperated. I tried to keep things light, smiling as I replied, "Sorry, I'm not good at that kind of stuff." Matthew and I had met when he worked part-time at a cafe I frequented. We hit it off after several conversations, started dating, and eventually got married. Now, he owns the cafe, but paperwork has never been his strength. It often fell on me to sort it out. As I sighed at yet another task added to my plate, my mother-in-law chimed in, "Lori, I'm craving Chinese tonight. Make sure to rinse the rice well. Also, Denise and the kids are visiting this weekend, so plan the meals accordingly." "Sure, I understand," I replied, trying to mask my frustration as I hurried out the door to escape the mounting pressures at home. Initially, I was filled with excitement for my new life with Matthew, but that enthusiasm faded when he proposed a significant change. "My mom seems lonely living by herself. Why don't we all move into our big house together?" he suggested. And so, we moved in with his mother. It quickly became apparent that household upkeep wasn't her strong suit. After my father-in-law passed away, she lived off her pension, spending most of it dining out or ordering in. The responsibility of maintaining the house fell squarely on my shoulders. Matthew, holding traditional views, believed housework was a woman's duty, leaving me to manage everything. Weekends, which I had hoped would offer a reprieve, became even more chaotic when Denise visited with her kids, adding to the workload. One day, Denise made an announcement, "I'm getting divorced, and we'll be moving back here with the kids next month," she declared. Stunned, I managed to respond, "It must have been tough. When are you moving?" "As soon as possible," she replied. Though surprised, I held on to a sliver of hope. Perhaps her presence would ease the burden. We had a decent relationship, and I thought this change might bring us closer, but reality painted a different picture. Denise, raised with the same mindset as her mother, seemed allergic to housework. She spent her days lounging on the sofa, engrossed in TV, often with a snack in hand. I couldn't help but wonder if her aversion to domestic responsibilities had contributed to her marital troubles. Instead of alleviating the workload, her presence added to it. I now had to prepare extra meals for her children and pack lunches for kindergarten. My hopes of shared responsibilities proved futile. At work, my responsibilities had also increased. Early mornings, overtime, and late returns left me drained. Coming home to a cluttered, chaotic house only intensified my exhaustion. The mess and constant demands wore me down. "Is dinner ready yet? Why are you home so late?" The questions, laced with judgment, were a daily reminder of the growing strain in my life. When I arrived home, the familiar sight of clutter and an endless list of chores awaited me. No sooner had I set my bag down than the sharp remarks began. "Lori, there's a mountain of laundry waiting," my mother-in-law snapped. "Being busy isn't an excuse to slack off." Inside, I wanted to shout, "I'm trying my best," but as usual, I swallowed my frustration and held back. My sister-in-law often added her 2 cents, her tone light but biting. "Lori, standing up to mom is bold, but for the kids' sake, shouldn't you put more effort into making homemade meals?" Tired and nearing my limit, I couldn't help but retort, "If you've got so much free time, maybe you could help out with the chores once in a while." Her response was a dismissive laugh. "Haha, since Matthew owns a store, you don't even need to work, right? Maybe you should try harder at home." Their constant jabs piled on, each one heavier than the last. The expectation that I should somehow do more, despite my already packed schedule, weighed on me. One night, pushed to my breaking point, I decided to confront Matthew. "I've been incredibly busy lately," I began, my voice trembling with exhaustion. "Neither your mother nor your sister helps out with the chores. It's really hard to manage everything alone." Matthew's reaction stung like a slap. "Lori, are you speaking ill of my family?" he asked, his tone cold and defensive. "That's not what I mean," I explained, trying to stay calm, "but it's overwhelming to do this all by myself. If you could just help occasionally, it would make things easier." His reply was blunt and dismissive. "I'm busy managing the store, it's not like a regular job. And isn't housework a wife's responsibility?" Crushed by his indifference, I retreated to my thoughts, sitting alone in the kitchen. "If they won't help, then I'll find a way to help myself," I resolved, my frustration turning into determination. I grabbed my phone, opened my favorite shopping app, and started adding items to my cart. A few days later, my reinforcements arrived: a high-tech washing machine, a robotic vacuum, and a sleek rice cooker. Each appliance felt like a lifeline, offering me a glimmer of relief. As I set up the new washing machine, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law walked in, their faces a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Wow, Lori, you got such a fancy washing machine. Wasn't the old one still working?" my mother-in-law asked, her skepticism barely hidden. I smiled calmly. "It was, but it was slow, and this one can handle the laundry much faster," I explained. Their attention quickly shifted to the robotic vacuum and kitchen gadgets. "You've upgraded everything," my sister-in-law noted, her tone slightly accusatory. "These will help us keep the house clean and save time," I said, a hint of pride in my voice. Later, my mother-in-law called me aside. "Lori, do we really need all these new appliances?" she asked sharply. "Aren't we relying too much on machines?" Keeping my tone even, I replied, "The older ones weren't as efficient. Since Matthew is so busy with the store, I thought this would make things run smoother for everyone." Matthew, who had overheard the conversation, added hesitantly, "Maybe we should be more frugal." Despite their reservations, I held firm. These appliances were more than just tools, they were my small act of rebellion, a way to reclaim a bit of sanity amidst the chaos. Conceited? Maybe you're right, I thought, but frustration simmered inside me. The conversation escalated quickly. "Are you even considering our household needs?" my mother-in-law challenged, her tone sharp. I stumbled over my words, feeling cornered. "I am, but I'm just a bit exhausted," I admitted, my voice faltering. "That's enough," she snapped, disbelief dripping from every syllable. "I can't believe you're our daughter-in-law," my sister-in-law added with a disdainful glare. "I'll watch over Matthew. We don't need someone like you here." Desperate, I turned to Matthew for support, but his cold reply cut deeper than their words. "I understand what Mom and Sis are saying. It's difficult having a wife who..." His words trailed off, leaving an icy silence in their wake. As they left the room, I sat there, their words weighing heavily on me. Yet, amidst the pain, a flicker of resolve ignited in my heart. I had made my choices. Those appliances were not just tools, but lifelines. I needed them to manage the chaos and preserve my sanity. Matthew, however, wasn't finished. Looking at me with a smug, almost cruel smile, he said, "I have my store, so I decide how to spend my money, but being with someone who spends without thinking might be too hard for me." His words stung, but I held my composure, silently counting to 12. With a touch of malice, he continued, "Also, I've noticed things have been going well with the new part-time girl at the store. She's more attractive than you are now. Maybe it's time for you to find a new place to live." A wave of anger rose within me, but I forced it down. I took a deep breath and replied calmly, "All right, I'll look for a new home." Matthew's smugness grew. "Finally, you understand. I'll feel much better without you around." That night, Matthew signed the divorce papers without hesitation. I packed my essentials, took the papers, and moved to a nearby weekly rental. No one tried to stop me, and as I left, I couldn't help but wonder if they had ever truly cared. After finalizing the divorce at the city office, I found a stylish apartment and began anew. Around the same time, an unexpected opportunity came my way, a promotion to section manager, a role I had previously turned down due to family obligations. I embraced it with vigor, throwing myself into my work with a renewed sense of purpose and fulfillment. One busy day, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my former mother-in-law's name. Surprised, I ignored it, We had no reason to be in contact anymore. A year passed, and I had almost forgotten those calls when, on a relaxing weekend, my phone rang again. This time, curiosity got the better of me. "Hello? Is something wrong?" I answered cautiously. "Lori, I finally got through. I didn't think you'd answer after so many calls." Her voice carried an unfamiliar uncertainty. "Well, it's been a while. What's going on?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated before speaking. "How's your new life?" Despite her probing, I responded cheerfully. "It's great. I love my new apartment. Work is going smoothly, and I even got a promotion. I'm enjoying my freedom." "That's good, Lori. Can you come back home?" she asked abruptly, catching me off guard. "Why?" I blurted out, suspicion creeping into my voice. "We're struggling financially," she admitted after a pause. I wasn't surprised. Matthew's cafe only brings in about $2,000 a month, right? If no one else in the family works, things could be tough, I said, my tone measured. "You know about that?" she asked, clearly startled. "Yes," I replied simply, already well aware of their precarious situation. I had always managed the accounting for Matthew's cafe, while he flaunted the image of a successful owner, oblivious to the true state of his business. It was almost laughable how unaware he was. I handled all the finances, from procurement to covering his mounting losses, so of course, I knew the truth. "You knew all this, and didn't tell us? We had no idea you were doing so well in such a big company, or that you were contributing so much to the household expenses," my former mother-in-law exclaimed. I nodded. "Yes, I contributed over $5,000 each month. That's what kept everything afloat." The revelation left her momentarily speechless. After I left, the reality of their financial situation must have hit hard. "Lori, can you please come back?" she pleaded again. Curious, I asked, "How's Matthew's cafe doing now?" Her sigh was heavy. "We might have to close soon. The part-time workers keep quitting." I couldn't help but smirk inwardly. Well, that's what happens when the owner's pride gets in the way of proper management. How many women out there do you think would support a guy like that? She faltered, searching for words. "Since you left, the house has been a mess. It's chaotic, with things scattered everywhere. We've been eating out because no one cooks, and the washing machine broke down," she admitted, painting a picture of complete disarray. "You can't afford a new washing machine?" I asked, intrigued. She hesitated. "We relied on the appliances you took back. I didn't realize how much we depended on them." I raised an eyebrow. "I bought those for my convenience, so it was fair for me to take them, right?" "Yes, but I never realized housework was this challenging," she admitted grudgingly. I couldn't resist a bit of sarcasm. With 3 adults in the house, how can it be that hard? What are Matthew and Denise doing? Her voice grew tired. "Matthew has been lazing around at home since sales dropped and his staff started quitting. He used to spend money recklessly, and now he's despondent. Denise doesn't help with anything and still expects an allowance from me. Living on just my pension for the 3 of us is hard." I sighed, the memories of their dismissive attitudes replaying in my mind. "Denise once told me I was unnecessary because she was there," I replied, my tone laced with irony. Desperation crept into her voice. "Lori, we're really in trouble. Please, reconsider." I paused before answering firmly. "I have no intention of returning. Living with all that baggage must be hard." She sounded lost for words, and I almost felt a pang of pity. Just as I was about to end the call, she added, "There's an issue with the property tax. We might have to let go of the house." The weight of her words hung in the air, but I remained resolute. "I see. You'll have to figure that out as a family." Without waiting for a response, I ended the call and blocked her number. Back in my apartment, I held my favorite mug of coffee, the aroma soothing me as I gazed at the serene view outside. A spontaneous smile crossed my face, reveling in the quiet and freedom of my new life. A few months later, while wandering through the old neighborhood, I noticed the cafe was shut down, its once lively atmosphere now silent and empty. Nostalgia tugged at me briefly as I passed by. Not far away, I spotted a sold sign outside my former in-laws' house. By chance, I bumped into an old neighbor who filled me in. They sold the house quickly and moved to a small apartment. It's been rough for them, constant arguments and even complaints about garbage piling up. It's become a bit of gossip around here. I nodded, thinking about how a little effort could have changed their circumstances. Yet, they never tried. As I walked away, my thoughts drifted to the life I had built for myself. Recently, a charming coworker confessed his admiration for my hard work. and we'd started dating. For the first time, I felt genuine excitement about what the future could hold. If I get married again, I mused, I want it to be a truly happy one. The thought filled me with hope, and I couldn't help but smile, ready to embrace whatever came next. Shouldn't you be helping more around the house? If this is the kind of spouse you're going to be, maybe you should just leave, my mother-in-law snapped, her words sharp and gaze piercing. I was taken aback by her harsh tone. Beside her, my sister-in-law added dismissively, you always look exhausted but never seem to get anything done. Feeling overwhelmed, I turned to my husband, Matthew, hoping for some support. This is too much, don't you think? Your mom and sister are being really harsh, I said, trying to find understanding in his eyes. His response only deepened my distress. I agree with them, he said bluntly, I'm swamped with work, and it's becoming a problem that you're not helping more at home. Things are going well with the new part-time worker, and frankly, you're just slowing us down. Maybe you should find somewhere else to stay. Stunned by Matthew's words, I looked around at the three of them, feeling the weight of their judgment press down on me. Anger rushed through me, but I took a deep breath, calmed myself, and replied, I need some time to think. My name is Lori, and I'm 35 years old. I've always balanced both my job and household duties. It's common for women to work after marriage, and I love my job. I've worked hard to excel in the company I joined right after college, but lately, everything feels like it's falling apart. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, Matthew came to me looking concerned. Lori, can you take care of this? He asked, handing me a file stuffed with receipts and bills. You should get the cafe's finances in order. I smiled, trying to keep the mood light. Sorry, I'm not good with that stuff, I replied. I met Matthew while he worked part-time at a cafe I often visited. After a few conversations, we started dating, eventually talking about marriage. Now, he owns the cafe, but despite his business skills, he struggles with the paperwork and often asks me to handle it. As I sighed, my mother-in-law added, Lori, I'm craving Chinese food tonight. Could you rinse the rice well? Also, Denise and the kids are coming this weekend, so we need to plan their meals. Sure, I understand. I nodded quickly, agreeing to her request before hurrying out the door, eager to escape the pressure mounting at home. I had hoped that moving in with Matthew would bring a new chapter in our lives together, but things had only gotten more complicated. Matthew soon suggested, my mom seems lonely living by herself. Why don't we move in together into our big house? So, here I am, living with his mother. To put it gently, she's not exactly skilled in maintaining a household. After my father-in-law passed, my mother-in-law started living off his pension, spending most of it on dining out or ordering takeout, leaving the domestic duties to me. Matthew, holding traditional views, seemed to think housework was solely my responsibility, and I ended up managing everything. To make things worse, Matthew's sister, Denise, often dropped by with her kids, further expanding my list of tasks. Weekends, which I had hoped would offer some respite, became chaotic as I entertained her children and cooked meals for the family. Then one day, Denise dropped a bombshell, Lori, I'm getting divorced, and I'll be moving back here with the kids next month. I was stunned, momentarily speechless. Really? Do you have something to say? She prodded. I managed to reply, it must have been tough. When are you moving? I want to move as soon as possible, she answered. Though surprised by the news of Denise and her kids moving in, I harbored hope that maybe her presence would make the household chores more manageable. We had a decent relationship, and I thought her moving in might bring us closer, maybe even encourage her to pitch in. Reality quickly set in differently. Denise, it seemed, was as averse to housework as her mother. She spent her days lounging on the sofa, often with a snack in hand, engrossed in TV. I couldn't help but wonder if her resistance to domestic duties had contributed to her marriage falling apart. Now, with the added task of preparing extra meals for her kids and packing lunches for kindergarten, my workload grew even heavier. My hopes for help from Denise were quickly dashed, and I found myself with even less free time. At my job, the workload ramped up significantly. I started early, often worked overtime, and returned home drained, only to be greeted by a cluttered, barely walkable living space. The mess intensified my exhaustion. To make matters worse, My mother-in-law and sister-in-law never missed a chance to question me. Is dinner ready yet? Or why are you home so late? Became their daily refrain, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of their judgment on my shoulders. The moment I step inside after a long day, the pressure starts to mount. Lori, there's a mountain of laundry waiting. Don't use your busyness as an excuse to slack off. My mother-in-law chid sharply. Inside, I'm screaming. I'm trying my best, but I hold my tongue. Before I can even respond, my sister-in-law chimes in, pushing further. Standing up to your mother-in-law is bold. Lori, but for the kids' sake, try harder to make homemade meals. Her words feel like a slap. Exhausted, I retort, though my voice is weary. If you have so much free time, why don't you help out with the chores once in a while? I've even overheard Matthew's sister joking. Haha, since Matthew owns a store, Lori doesn't need to work, right? Maybe she should try harder at home. Their words stack up, suffocating me under the weight of expectations, as if I should do even more. One night, at my breaking point, I decided it was time to speak up to Matthew. I've been incredibly busy lately, and neither your mother nor your sister is helping with the chores. It's really hard, I said, hoping for some understanding. Matthew's reaction was sharp. Lori, you're not speaking ill of our family, are you? He asked, his tone hardening. I steadied myself and explained, that's not my intention, but it's challenging to handle everything on my own. If you could help out occasionally, it would make things easier for me. He responded dismissively, I'm busy managing the store. It's not like a regular job. Housework is the wife's responsibility, right? Disappointed by his lack of support, I sat alone afterward, feeling a mixture of frustration and helplessness. Then, a spark of determination ignited within me. I'm not going to let this be the way it is, I thought. With a small but resolute fist pump, I grabbed my phone, opened my favorite online shopping app, and started adding essential items to my cart. By the time I finished my purchases, I felt a small victory, an act of control amidst the chaos. That night, I went to bed with a sense of accomplishment, ready to face whatever came next. A few days later, my eagerly awaited delivery arrived, transforming my routine. It included a state-of-the-art washing machine, a robotic vacuum that could navigate every corner of our home, and a rice cooker that promised perfect rice with minimal effort. Each item felt like a lifeline, offering a little relief and making daily life just a bit easier. As I set up the new washing machine, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law walked in, their expressions a mix of surprise and curiosity. Wow, Lori, you got such a fancy washing machine. The old one still worked, didn't it? My mother-in-law asked, her tone laced with skepticism. I met her gaze with a calm smile, unbothered by her judgment. As I continued setting up the new appliance, it felt like a small, silent victory over the pressures I'd been facing. I calmly replied, the old one was getting slow, and this new one can do the laundry much faster. Their attention quickly shifted to the robotic vacuum and the new kitchen gadgets I'd also upgraded. I've updated these, too, I said, showing them with a hint of pride. These appliances, everything from the cleaning robot to the convenient cooking gadgets, were now my allies in managing the household more efficiently. Lori, can we talk for a moment? My mother-in-law's voice had a sharp edge as she beckoned me into another room. I followed, sensing a confrontation was coming. Once we sat down, the tension between us was palpable. Why did you buy so many things? She asked, her tone cold. Do you really need all these new appliances? Or is it just to make your life easier? I tried to remain composed. I thought it would help things run smoother around the house, I explained, choosing my words carefully, but I could feel the simmering discontent. My mother-in-law wasn't satisfied with my response. Aren't we relying too much on machines? She countered. My sister-in-law, standing by, waved her hand dismissively, signaling her agreement. Despite their resistance, I held my ground. The appliances we had were outdated, Matthew's busy with his store, and I thought being more efficient at home would help everyone. Matthew nodded, his expression neutral. Maybe we should be more frugal, he suggested. His voice carried a tone of subtle reproach, and my frustration bubbled up. Maybe you're right, I conceded quietly, but inside, I was fuming. The conversation had quickly escalated. Are you even considering our household needs? My mother-in-law's voice grew sharper. I stammered, caught off guard. I am, but I'm just really exhausted, I admitted, feeling cornered. That's enough, my mother-in-law snapped, her voice filled with disbelief. I can't believe you're our daughter-in-law. My sister-in-law added, her expression dripping with disdain. I'll watch over Matthew. We don't need someone like you here. I looked to Matthew, hoping for some support, But instead, I received a cold, dismissive response. "I understand what Mom and Sis are saying," he said, his words trailing off into uncomfortable silence. A chill lingered in the air as they left the room, and I sat there, the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. Despite their harsh words, my resolve only grew stronger. The appliances I had bought were necessary, not just for managing the household, but for my sanity. When I looked at Matthew, my heart sank. He gave me a cold smile and said, "I have my store, so I decide how to spend my money, but being with someone who spends without thinking might be too hard for me." His words stung, but I kept my composure, silently counting to 12 before responding. He continued, a cruel edge in his voice. "Also, I've noticed things have been going well with the new part-time girl at the store. She's more attractive than you are now. Maybe it's time for you to find a new place to live." A wave of anger surged within me, but I held it back. I took a deep breath, then calmly said, "All right, I'll look for a new home." "Finally, you understand," he replied smugly. "I'll feel much better without you around." That night, Matthew signed the divorce papers, and I left, carrying nothing but the essentials and the divorce papers in hand. No one tried to stop me, leaving me to wonder if they had ever really cared about me at all. After finalizing the divorce at the city office, I found a stylish apartment and started fresh. Around the same time, an unexpected opportunity came my way, a promotion to section manager, a role I had previously put off due to my family situation. I embraced this new role with vigor, dedicating myself to my work and feeling a renewed sense of purpose. One busy day, my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was my former mother-in-law. Thinking we had nothing to do with each other anymore, I dismissed the call without checking the message. My new life had begun, and I wasn't looking back. A year passed, and one relaxing weekend, as I enjoyed my favorite music, my phone rang again. To my surprise, it was my former mother-in-law. I couldn't help but wonder what she wanted after all this time. I answered the phone. "Hello, is something wrong?" "Lori, I finally got through. I didn't think you'd answer after so many calls," my former mother-in-law said, her voice wavering with uncertainty. "Well, it's been a while. What's going on?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral but cautious. She hesitated, clearly unsure of how to proceed, before asking, "How's your new life?" I gave a cheerful reply, masking any traces of tension. "It's great. I love my new apartment, and work is going smoothly. I even got a promotion, and I'm really enjoying the freedom." "That's good," she said. "Lori, can you come back home?" I was taken aback. "Why?" "We're struggling financially," she admitted, prompting me to think to myself that I had suspected as much. I responded cautiously, "Matthew's cafe only makes about $2,000 a month, right? If no one else in the family works, things could be tough." "You know about that?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," I replied. "I handled all the accounting." Matthew pretended his business was thriving, but he was completely oblivious to the real financial situation. She seemed stunned. "You knew all this and didn't tell us? We had no idea you were doing so well in such a big company, or that you were contributing so much to the household expenses." I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. "Yes, I contributed more than $5,000 a month. That's how you all managed after I left." The truth was that I had been covering the gaps in Matthew's business losses, which he had never acknowledged. And now, it seemed, reality had hit them hard. "Lori, please come back," my former mother-in-law pleaded again. I sighed and asked, "How's the cafe doing now?" She sighed heavily. "We might have to close soon. The part-time workers keep quitting." I smirked inwardly. It's hard to keep it going with his management style, isn't it? His little bit of pride doesn't help. Not doing proper work, I mean. How many women out there would support a guy like that? There was a long pause before she weakly responded. "I never realized housework could be this hard. With 3 adults in the house, how can it be this chaotic? What are Matthew and your daughter doing?" I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "As for Matthew," she continued, "his staff has been quitting, and sales have dropped. When he found out, he just became downcast and has been lazing around at home. He used to spend money from the store without any restraint. And Denise doesn't do anything around the house. She even gets her allowance from me." She sounded defeated. "Living on just my pension for the 3 of us is really hard." I replied, my voice tinged with sarcasm. Denise once told me I was unnecessary because she was there." "Please, Lori," my former mother-in-law begged. "We're really in trouble. Living on just my pension is tough." I responded firmly, "I have no intention of going back to that house. It must be hard living with all that baggage." She seemed lost for words. I almost felt sorry for her, but as I was about to hang up, she seemed eager to say something more. "Lori, I'm really sorry, can you reconsider?" Her voice was drained with exhaustion. I paused, wondering if we could ever spend time together with smiles again. "Was it really that hard without me?" I asked, a mix of surprise and calmness in my tone. After a short pause, she sighed and shared more distressing news. "Yes, there's an issue with the property tax. We might have to let go of the house." The call ended with a heavy silence. I reflected on the complex dynamics of the family I had left behind and the new life I had embraced. "I see," I said, though I didn't want to be involved anymore. "You'll have to figure out what to do with your family." I hung up and quickly set up my phone to block any more calls from her. Sitting in my room, holding my favorite mug filled with aromatic coffee, I savored my solitude, gazing out at the scenery. A spontaneous smile crossed my face. A few months later, as I passed by the cafe where Matthew used to work, I noticed it was now quiet and empty. The lively place I once knew seemed a distant memory, and I felt a twinge of nostalgia. It seemed they had closed the shop. While wandering around the old town, I got curious about what had become of my former in-laws' house. To my surprise, I saw a sold sign outside. By chance, I bumped into an old neighbor who filled me in. They had quickly sold their house and moved into a small apartment nearby. The new place was filled with loud arguments, and there was even talk about the smell of garbage, becoming a bit of local gossip. It sounded like things were tough for them, but as I looked at the old house, I wondered why they hadn't tried harder. A lot had happened since then, but I was living each day to the fullest. Recently, a handsome guy from my workplace had confessed his admiration for my hardworking nature. Now, we were enjoying dates, and I was excited about what the future held. If I ever get married again, I wanted to be for real happiness. Thinking about all this, I felt a surge of excitement for the future. The inheritance was all mine. Father would be happier if his son inherited everything rather than some woman who isn't even related by blood. "You're not my sister anymore, I'm cutting ties with you," my brother declared with a sneering smile. Indeed, to our father, I wasn't related by blood. I was my mother's child from a previous relationship. Still, he had loved me as his own daughter, which made him very special to me. I was furious that my brother wanted to monopolize everything our father left behind, but his words about cutting ties with me brought a sense of relief. "Fine by me, once you inherit, don't ever contact me again," I replied. "Like I'd ever do that, and don't expect a single penny from me later," he shot back. "I'm Kelly, a 29-year-old civil servant. My brother, Steve, is 22 and just graduated from university. He often brags about his prestigious job at a well-known company, always looking down on the rural city office where I work. Must be Dad's genes, right? I've got the blood of a father who worked for a major corporation," he'd boast, smugly emphasizing the bloodline he shares with our father. "Steve and I share the same mother but have different fathers. Steve is the biological son of our father, while I am my mother's child from her previous marriage. Though I was technically a stepchild, Dad never treated me differently. He loved and cared for me deeply, which is why I regard him as my true father. My biological father, on the other hand, left us when I was little, running off with his mistress. I barely remember him. When Steve was younger, he didn't care about our different fathers, but everything changed after our mother passed away in a tragic car accident when I was an adult and Steve was still in middle school. Grieving and unable to cope, Steve started blaming me. At the funeral, he screamed, "Why did Mom have to die? It should have been you. No one would care if the step-sibling was gone." His cruel words shocked me, but I stayed silent as our father, angrier than I'd ever seen him, scolded Steve harshly. That day, any affection I had for my brother faded. Over the years, our relationship deteriorated. Steve seemed obsessed with outshining me academically, but his ambitions always backfired. He failed to get into his first-choice schools for both high school and university. As a student, he couldn't out-earn me, a full-time employee, and he avoided sports or arts to escape potential failure. Instead, Steve focused on asserting his higher status as Dad's biological son. He taunted me endlessly, saying, "I'm Dad's real child, you're just an outsider." Initially, I believed his behavior stemmed from misplaced grief. but as he grew older, his words carried genuine malice. Exhausted by his provocations, I started avoiding him altogether. When Steve decided to live at home during university, I moved out to my own apartment. I even coordinated visits with Dad to ensure I wouldn't run into him. 4 years later, Steve graduated and landed a job at a reputable company. I had prepared a tie as a graduation gift, but decided against giving it to him when he greeted me with his usual smugness. "Of course, I got a better job than you. I've got Dad's genes," he said, clearly unchanged by his time at university. I continued living independently, working as a civil servant, while Steve lived with Dad and navigated the struggles of a new working adult. Unfortunately, this phase didn't last long. Less than a year later, Dad fell gravely ill and passed away suddenly, leaving me no time to say goodbye. At the funeral, I took on the responsibilities of the chief mourner. Thanks to Dad's meticulous planning, most of the arrangements were straightforward, except for the inheritance. The only inheritors were Steve and me, and I knew the discussion would lead to conflict. As expected, Steve showed up late to our meeting without so much as an apology and immediately said, "The inheritance? I'm the real child, so it's all mine. You're just a stepchild, an outsider. Isn't it greedy for an outsider to claim anything?" Tired of his arrogance, I offered a deal. "I won't inherit anything. In return, you must promise never to contact me for the rest of your life." "Deal? Like I'd ever contact you. Just disappear," he said, sneering. Disgusted, I left the meeting. The next day, I visited a lawyer to formalize my renunciation of the inheritance. "Kelly, as a stepchild, you technically don't have inheritance rights," the lawyer started. "Actually, Dad adopted me legally," I interrupted, "but I don't want anything. I'm giving it all up." Dad had officially adopted me after marrying my mother, which meant I had full inheritance rights. But I wanted nothing to do with the complications of being labeled a stepchild or a legitimate child. I simply wanted to cut ties and move on. A month later, the family court finalized my renunciation. I was finally free from the burdens of my brother and the toxic family dynamic. I contacted Steve. "Hello, my renunciation of the inheritance is complete," I began. "You know, from the estate investigation, Dad had—" "Shut up," Steve cut me off angrily. "I get it. You've renounced the inheritance. Stop acting like you're my real sister, and don't ever contact me again." He hung up before I could say another word. I sighed deeply, knowing Steve. It was only a matter of time before he came crying back for help. That thought made me feel even worse. 3 months later, the calls and emails started coming in, numerous and persistent. I reluctantly answered one of his calls, hearing his exhausted voice on the other end. "You know what? I need to borrow some money," he said. "Dad had debts, and I can't keep up with the repayments. I used Dad's savings too, but it's still not enough." "What? Sure, Dad had some loans to repay, but if you've used all his savings for it, how is it still this bad?" I asked, confused. Steve immediately snapped. "Did you know about this? Did you push the debt onto me, knowing everything? You have such a bad personality." "Oh, right, because you're just a stepchild. You must be jealous of me, the legitimate child." I clenched my jaw. "Right, because I'm the one who hung up on you when I tried to warn you, and I'm the one who blocked your calls. Funny how you suddenly unblocked me when you needed help. Who's the one with the bad personality here?" The truth was, I had learned all about Dad's financial situation during the inheritance renunciation process. I had tried to inform Steve back then, but he had cut me off entirely, left with no way to communicate. I had given up trying. Now, he was coming to me in tears, just as I had anticipated. "Do you even understand how hard it was for Dad to send you to high school and university?" I asked, frustrated. Sure, he had educational insurance and Mom's life insurance helped, but things like the house and car had to be paid for with loans. "I'm not your sister, right? So why don't you take this up with the mortgage lender or the lawyer instead of me, an outsider?" "What are you talking about?" Steve retorted. "Don't sweat the small stuff. Besides, I'm treating you like a sister, even though you're just a stepchild. You should be happy about that. Now, come on, Kelly, give me some money." Furious at his arrogance, I sharply hung up the call and blocked his number. Steve didn't know where I lived, and I had made sure not to leave any clues about my home at Dad's house. To be safe, I even got a new phone. But that didn't stop him. "Kelly, please, I need money, otherwise, I can't survive." Steve started showing up at the city office where I worked. Gone was his usual smugness. He looked genuinely distressed. He would visit repeatedly, always during lunch breaks. As if sneaking away from his job, on days he didn't visit, he bombarded my phone with calls, disrupting my work. I explained the situation to my boss, and they moved me to an administrative position, but Steve's harassment escalated. He began staying past closing hours, waiting in the parking lot to confront me after work. One evening, I finally had enough. I caught him lingering in the parking lot and dragged him aside. "Stop it already," I said. "Don't cause trouble at my workplace. I told you to consult the loan institutions and the lawyer." "I already did," Steve snapped, arms crossed, anger flashing in his eyes. "The group life insurance covered the mortgage, so I don't have to pay for the house anymore. The car loan is down to about $5,000, and I renegotiated the payments, but that's not the problem." "Then what is the problem?" I pressed. Steve hesitated, nervously looking around before finally admitting, "Dad had some savings, so I spent it on various things. I went over budget. Then I borrowed money from a friend, but now I can't pay him back. He's saying I scammed him, and no one else will lend me money. If I go to a predatory lender, I'll be in even deeper trouble." I sighed, my head pounding. His story was convoluted, but the truth was clear. Steve had spiraled into a financial mess of his own making. "So, let me get this straight," I said. "You kept borrowing money to pay off debts, and now you're stuck." "Exactly," he said, his desperation growing. "I think I'm already blacklisted. If you pay it off for me, it'll all be over. Just $88,000, come on, Kelly." When he reached out to me, I slapped his hand away. "There's no way I'm giving you a dime," I said coldly. "This is entirely your fault for overspending and borrowing from loan sharks. Why should I clean up your mess?" Steve glared at me, his voice dripping with contempt. "Is it because we're only half related? Stepchildren are the worst, so selfish and unpleasant." Without another word, I got into my car and started the engine. Steve tried to cling to the door, but I shoved him off. "You promised never to contact me again in exchange for the inheritance," I reminded him. "You've broken that promise, begged for money, and insulted me. I don't owe you anything. If you show up again, I'll call the police." "Kelly, please." I didn't let him finish. I drove off, leaving him behind in the parking lot. Steve continued to harass the city hall after that, showing up uninvited and lingering until closing time. He called multiple departments, disrupting their work. He didn't make a scene at the counters, so reporting him as a nuisance was difficult. Finally, I decided it was best to disappear. I explained everything to HR and was transferred to a branch office in the mountains. It was a quieter place, with fewer residents, but the work felt more fulfilling. I never returned to my old office. I didn't regret cutting ties with Steve, nor did I miss the complications of being labeled a stepchild or a legitimate child. Free at last, I could focus on building a life of my own, far from my brother's shadow.
My name is Sophia, and at 31, I work part-time at a neighborhood supermarket. Today marks the beginning of November, a time when things start to get busy as we head towards the year-end. The manager approached me, expressing interest in discussing some time off over Christmas. It felt unusual, as it's not often I request time off. The truth is, I began, "We're thinking of spending Christmas at my husband's parents' house this year. I'll need to take the 24th and 25th off." "Oh, that's what it's about. Of course, that's fine," the manager replied reassuringly. "You're always working hard, Sophia. Thank you. That's a great help. Isn't your husband's family based quite far away, and you're from around here, right?" the manager inquired. "Yes, I'm from the neighboring town, but my husband is from Boston," I explained. "Boston, huh? That's quite a distance," the manager remarked. "Yes, it is. Unfortunately, due to circumstances, we haven't been able to introduce Alexander yet," I shared. "Even more reason for you to head back. Don't worry about the store. Go and visit," the manager encouraged. "Thank you. I appreciate your understanding," I expressed gratefully. Alexander is my 2-year-old son, currently attending a child care center. When I gave birth 2 years ago, a certain societal issue made it difficult to introduce him, and we haven't found the right time. Recently, things have finally started to calm down. and it seemed like a good time. My husband, Lucas, is a medical technician at a hospital, making it difficult for him to take time off, so we were particularly keen to make it happen this Christmas. Later, Lucas returned home after Alexander was asleep, and as we shared a late dinner, he brought up the discussion we had agreed upon regarding getting time off from work. "Oh, by the way, I'll call my dad," Lucas mentioned. He tried to reach me while I was on my way home. Whenever there's news, it's always my dad who calls. My mom is the quiet type. She tends to delegate communication tasks to my dad. That's true. Now that you mention it, I nodded in agreement. My father-in-law has a cheerful personality, Lucas added, and he was quite friendly when we first visited to announce our marriage. He's always laughing and engaging in conversation. On the other hand, mother-in-law, as I put it, is quiet and speaks sparingly. Honestly, since getting married, we've hardly had the chance to converse, and I was hoping this visit to Lucas's home would help close the distance a bit. Lucas ended the call with his dad and turned to me, saying, "Dad is really excited to meet Alexander. He can't stop talking about it. Let me know if there's anything you want or need," he said, casting a thoughtful glance my way. I couldn't help but wonder what would unfold when we arrived, but I found solace in their excitement. My parents had also urged us to go this year, insisting we introduce Alexander. "But you love father-in-law and mother-in-law too, don't you?" Poof, we're both in the same boat, aren't we? Anticipation filled us as we finally returned to Lucas's home. The day we had been eagerly awaiting had arrived, Christmas morning. After about a 4-hour drive, we pulled up to Lucas's house just before noon. I noticed sister-in-law's family's car parked there, indicating their early arrival. "Merry Christmas," we called out as we stepped into the entrance. There, with a beaming smile, stood father-in-law. "Good job on the drive. Take it easy today." In his arms was Ava, sister-in-law's daughter. "Oh, Ava, you've grown so much," I explained. "I'm 6 years old now," she announced proudly. "Really? You're in elementary school," I replied, amazed. "Oh, there's Alexander," Ava said, stepping down from father-in-law's embrace to greet him. Alexander returned her smile, melting our hearts. Come on in, father-in-law ushered us into the living room, where sister-in-law Isabella and her husband awaited. Isabella's husband offered a warm smile, while Isabella herself appeared distant. "Merry Christmas," we greeted them, but there was no response from Isabella. Feeling a bit awkward, I tried to brush it off as Lucas joined us and greeted them warmly. "Isabella, Henry, Merry Christmas," he said. "Oh, we haven't seen each other for a while, have we? How have you been?" Isabella, who had been staring at us until a moment ago, now flashed us a smile. Did they just ignore me? It seemed like neither Isabella's husband nor Lucas noticed. Maybe I'm overthinking this, I thought, trying to shake off the discomfort as I settled into the living room. Lucas watched Alexander while I offered to help mother-in-law in the kitchen. "I'm good, really?" he insisted, but I knew it was important to lend a hand when we could. As Lucas kept an eye on Alexander, I made my way to the kitchen, where mother-in-law was busy. "Merry Christmas, mother-in-law. Let me help you," I'd offered. But as soon as I spoke, she shot me a glare, thumped my shoulder, and said, "You're in the way," before retreating to the living room. I could hear her say, "Oh, Lucas, Merry Christmas. Have you been well? What's going on? First, sister-in-law, and now mother-in-law. Did I do something wrong?" I couldn't think of anything. Lucas and I have been married for 4 years, and it's been 2 years since Alexander was born. We haven't really spoken or even communicated much over the phone during this time. What could it be? I don't understand. Maybe I shouldn't let it bother me. We were planning to head home later that day, so I decided I would discuss it with Lucas when we had the time and stopped worrying about it for the moment. When I returned to the living room and took Alexander from Lucas, father-in-law said, "Here you go, Alexander, monetary gifts for you." Alexander seemed really happy with the envelope father-in-law handed him. "Ah, Sophia, did you hear that?" Alexander just said, "Thank you" to me. What a smart kid. Father-in-law looked really happy. But what caught my attention was the sight of mother-in-law and sister-in-law grinning as soon as Alexander received the envelope. It wasn't just a simple grin, it seemed rather sarcastic. I instinctively felt they were up to something, but I reassured myself. Nothing like this has ever happened before. It must all be in my head. And so time passed, and in the evening, we headed home. The next day, we went to my parents' house since we see them often. Alexander was all smiles when he saw his grandparents. "Merry Christmas. Your grandpa and grandma have presents for you." Lucas and I were a bit taken aback by how much my parents spoiled Alexander. Just like the day before, my dad handed Alexander monetary gifts. Oh, Sophia, did you hear that? Alexander just said, "Thank you" to me. You're kidding. That's exactly what father-in-law said. Everyone laughed. As I took the monetary gifts from Alexander, I felt something unusual with my hand. Why does it feel so heavy? I had not sensed anything inside the envelope when I received it from my father-in-law the day before. Yet, I couldn't help but wonder at that moment. He wouldn't have put $100 in here, would he? Is that even okay? I decided to chalk it up to my parents' indulgent love for Alexander. Our home is about a 30-minute drive from where we were, so we ate lunch and then headed back. After giving Alexander a bath and putting him to bed, I decided to check the monetary gifts. Oh, it is indeed $100, just like last year. I kind of feel guilty. Well, we'll have to give something back in return, won't we? Just like last year, my parents didn't hold back, given I'm an only child, and Alexander is their first grandchild. I understood their affection, and yet I was a little flabbergasted. Nevertheless, I felt grateful, so I jotted down the amount of money received. But my dad seemed quite eager too. He was totally in sync with my father-in-law. This year will be interesting. Last year, since we couldn't meet, they had sent us a gift card, and the amount on the card was $100. They were thrilled to have a grandson, weren't they? Remembering my father-in-law holding Alexander and talking happily the day before, I continued the conversation and opened the envelope. That's when the unexpected happened. Wait, what? A leaf. There was a single green leaf inside the envelope. I was at a loss for words. Then Lucas, startled by my reaction, exclaimed, "What a leaf? What on earth is this?" He started to laugh uproariously. But what came to mind at that moment was the behavior of my mother-in-law and Isabella. No way, I thought. Anyway, I'll call them. They'll surely be concerned about this too. Lucas seemed to think it was all a prank, and while laughing, he tried to call my father-in-law, but there was no answer. Oh, they might be in the shower. Let me try calling Mom. Lucas then called his mother. It seemed she answered, and he told her about the leaf. From her surprised reaction, it was clear she was explaining something to Lucas. "Oh, so that's what it was, huh? All right, I'll let Sophia know." "Why do you want to talk to Sophia?" "Me? Hold on a sec." Lucas pulled the phone away from his ear and said, "Mom sounds super apologetic. She says she wants to apologize to you, Sophia. Is that okay?" Sure," I replied. While his words were surprising, I reluctantly took the phone from Lucas and picked up the call. "Hello." Just like that, mother-in-law went completely silent. Then I heard a faint, familiar laugh in the background that sounded like Isabella. "Hello, mother-in-law. Like I would ever apologize to the likes of you, you poverty-stricken wife. Use me, your children are as poor as a leaf. See ya, paper wife." With those unbelievable words thrown at me, she hung up. At that moment, I realized all the events of yesterday were an act of spite. "What's wrong, Sophia? You seem off." But how could I ever convince Lucas of what just transpired? First, I needed to find out what mother-in-law told Lucas. "Hey, what did mother-in-law say to you?" Well, it seems like Dad accidentally gave out the gifts that Ava had prepared. Remember how Isabella and her family came over for Christmas? First, Dad had prepared some monetary gifts. Then Ava said she wanted to help too. Somehow, in the process, she decided to include a leaf from the garden as a bonus. She might have swapped it with the money. I see. What's up, Sophia? You seem off. I found myself at a loss for words, suddenly labeled as a poverty-stricken wife. I had never experienced something like this before and struggled to find the right words to explain what had happened. Just as I was about to speak, a call came in from father-in-law. "Oh, sorry, Dad. Maybe he's calling back," Lucas said, putting the phone on the table and switching it to speaker. The phone rustled, and Lucas asked, "Ha, Dad, did you call by mistake?" "Ha, Lucas? Oh, it says Lucas on the phone. Ha, Ava, is that you?" "Yeah, you got it." It turned out Ava was the one who called back using father-in-law's phone. "You're going to get in trouble with Grandpa, Ava." "That's fine. I wanted to talk. Grandpa's in the shower. It's all good. Plus, Grandpa always says we should answer the phone when it rings, so I'm talking for him." Lucas commented, "Well, it's nice that Ava is happy to talk on the phone. This isn't the right time, perhaps sensing my mood." "Sorry, Ava. We're in the middle of an important conversation." "Oh, really? Well, that's a bummer. Bye, Lucas, and bye, poor auntie." "Wait, Ava, huh? What's up? What did you say at the end?" Both Lucas and I didn't miss what Ava had said at the end. It sounded like she said, "Poor wife," because Mommy's grandma also called auntie poor wife. She just said it earlier too. Right now, Mom and Grandma are chatting over coffee. "Ava, could you explain to Lucas what you mean by earlier? When Grandma was on the phone?" "Yes, so here's the thing. Broke wife once mentioned this to me. It's all about the leaf. Mom used to prepare the leaf with a smile and taught me all about it. She said that for the less fortunate, monetary gifts come down to a single leaf." Lucas looked at me with a baffled expression, and all I could do was stay silent. That's when my sister-in-law, who had noticed Ava's phone call, shouted, "Ava." However, at that same moment, my father-in-law said, "We'll talk about it later." Feeling confused about what was happening, I saw the phone being handed over from Ava to my father-in-law. "Sorry about that. I was taking a shower." Then when I got dressed and came out, I found Ava saying something outrageous. "So you heard it too, Dad?" "I'm sorry, Lucas. Could you hand the phone to Sophia?" "No worries, Dad. We're on speaker. Sophia's listening too." "All right, Sophia, was what Ava just said true? And those bizarre words were targeted at you, right?" "Yes, that's right." My father-in-law stammered over his words. Behind him, I could hear my mother-in-law and sister-in-law speaking rapidly and agitatedly, as if trying to make excuses. My father-in-law sighed deeply. "I am truly sorry. Please don't blame Ava. She didn't mean any harm." "No, it's all right. We don't mind at all. Emma's not at fault here." "Thank you. I'll follow up on this matter. Isabella's here too. We'll confirm things with her." With that, he ended the call. Lucas then looked at me, apologizing. "I'm really sorry. I have no idea what's going on," he said, utterly confused. I shared with him all the discomfort I felt during my visits to Lucas's house. We decided to wait for a response from my father-in-law. Surprisingly, we received a reply sooner than expected. And amazingly, the very next day, Isabella's husband drove father-in-law, mother-in-law, and Isabella to our house. Upon entering, they stood before a sullen mother-in-law and sister-in-law, and father-in-law, along with Isabella's husband, apologized profusely. "We've done something truly disrespectful. We are sorry. We apologize for the outrageous behavior of my wife." The deep apology was appreciated, but the two of them didn't utter a single word. After being married for 4 years, I couldn't fathom the reason behind their animosity, even though we rarely met. May I ask, why did you suddenly act this way towards me?" If I understood the reason, I could address it. There might be some misunderstanding, I thought, but there was no response to my question. The two of them were intent on ignoring me. Father-in-law, enraged by their attitude, shouted, "Answer her." Finally, Isabella grudgingly responded, but her answer was unexpected. "Well, Mom was originally against the marriage, Wait, that's it? And why? Why did you let him marry a woman like this? A woman who doesn't even wear a single brand name item, who dresses in mass-produced cheap clothes. Indeed, I'm not interested in branded items. On the other hand, Isabella is the type who likes branded goods, and my mother-in-law also owns and wears a few brand-named items. Are you saying? Don't tell me that's the only reason you insulted her? That's all it is. I just don't want her in our family. I wish they would divorce soon, and she would just disappear. You know, how could you say something so rude? And what about you? Why are you supporting such a woman? You're a top-tier company employee and elite. You should choose someone suitable for our family, right? Despite Lucas being a well-qualified medical professional, we can't accept such a woman as a family member, can we? Upon hearing Isabella's true feelings, her husband was speechless. However, it would soon be proven by the next words of my mother-in-law that this attitude was inherited from her. Originally, you see, I had found a suitable partner for Lucas. Despite that, he brought home some unknown woman and declared they were getting married. It was a true shock. What, you were doing such a thing without telling us? There are limits to what's acceptable to do to Sophia. It's fine, isn't it? She's just a poor girl, isn't she? Her parents didn't seem very impressive either, quite impoverished, don't you think? She wasn't wearing a single branded item. In other words, she's from a struggling household that finds it hard to make ends meet, right? What? What are you saying? Besides, to love a child born of such a woman, impossible. It would taint our precious Ava. We had plans for her to marry a friend's child. Upon hearing his mother's true feelings, Lucas was speechless. Feeling the same way, wondering how I could have missed all this, considering that my father-in-law called not out of interest but disinterest, everything makes sense as harassment. Well, it's fine if you divorced. Please do it as soon as possible. Let's go. We don't need to get involved in this farce, I said, ready to clear up a misunderstanding for the sake of my pride. Just as my father-in-law was about to say something, I was ready to defend myself. The ones who dramatically opened the living room door were my parents. It's been a while, father-in-law, mother-in-law. Did Sophia call you? My parents, aware of the situation, had arrived just in time. When they heard that my father-in-law was coming over, I had contacted them. It seemed they had heard some of mother-in-law's terrible comments from outside the door. Their timing was perfect. My parents approached mother-in-law with serious faces. What is it? Then my parents took out business cards from their breast pockets and said, "Here you go." Amazingly, they dropped their business cards at mother-in-law's feet, their attitude seeming to say, "Pick it up." I had to try hard to suppress my laughter. The one who rose to their bait was Isabella, picking up the business card and shouting, "Stuck arrogance from a poor person. You didn't even wear any branded items today, and your clothes look mass-produced." As soon as she looked at the card, she realized her mistake. Mom startled. Mother-in-law also looked at the business card Isabella held. "You two are executives of Valac Clo." "Yes, my husband and I started out together. He's an executive at the headquarters. I'm the head of planning. Our daughter quit when she got married. You know that, right? Both of my parents are currently working at the headquarters of Valac Clo, a famous low-cost apparel brand. I also, after graduating from college, while I had spoken to my father-in-law and mother-in-law about myself at the time of our marriage, my parents had never explained their situation. So she could go back to work anytime she wanted, right? What? That's amazing. You work at that famous fashion brand's major corporation. So what do you mean we're poor? That my grandchild is the grandchild of a poor wife because you opposed the marriage? It's okay to harass us. It's not. We're really sorry. But that apology was only because my parents held executive jobs. Needless to say, it was beyond the point of being resolved by just an apology. Henry looked disappointed as he said, "I thought it was a good thing to leave Ava with my parents, but you?" I stuttered. "I'll drive you home, but after that, we'll live separately." "What? What are you talking about? I'm glad I got to see your true face. Let's discuss our divorce when we get home." Henry then left the house. At that moment, my father-in-law also stood up, bowed deeply to my parents, saying, "I'm really sorry for what happened." He then turned to us. "I'm really sorry. I'll be in touch." Looking sternly at my pale-faced mother-in-law, he said, "Be prepared when you get home." Before he too exited our house, my mother-in-law and Isabella hurriedly grabbed their belongings and rushed out. I caught my breath at home. After my parents kindly offered to pick up Alexander from the child care center later, I received a call from my father-in-law. He told me that my mother-in-law had been forcibly sent back to her parents' house. It's a de facto separation. Apparently, they made this decision because they were unsure what she might do to Alexander. But it's a separation with a premise of divorce, and it seems they are waiting for the right timing. As for Isabella, the divorce was finalized immediately after she returned home. Henry obtained custody of Ava Isabella, of course, has taken refuge in my mother-in-law's house. But she seems to be getting a good scolding from my mother-in-law's mother, who knows the truth and is currently on a job hunt. We continue to live our busy daily lives. It feels really good to not only see our child grow up as parents but also to share this joy with his grandparents.
My name is Abigail, and I am 25 years old. Yesterday marked a significant milestone in my life. I married my partner of 4 years in an intimate backyard ceremony, perfectly timed to coincide with our 4th anniversary. Though the wedding was small, its importance made postponement unthinkable. Every detail, from decorations to catering, had been carefully arranged, underscoring how impractical it would have been to reschedule. Yet, the day was bittersweet. My father, who was meant to walk me down the aisle, was absent. Initially, he claimed a medical emergency, but under pressure, he confessed the truth. He had chosen to attend a rare camping trip with my brother, who only visits a few weeks each year. His decision felt like a prioritization of my brother over me, and his dismissive suggestion that rescheduling would be easy only deepened my hurt. In his absence, my stepdad walked me down the aisle. It was a touching moment, but it carried a weight of emotion that shouldn't have been there. When my father arrived after the ceremony, he was visibly moved by the photos. Realizing the magnitude of what he had missed, we had a raw, emotional conversation that culminated in his tearful request for a second ceremony as a way to make amends. The situation left me conflicted. While I was deeply hurt by his initial decision, I was also pained by the regret and guilt he felt afterward. The day, which should have been filled solely with joy, became a reflection of the complicated dynamics within my family, underscoring how seemingly simple choices can have profound consequences. Growing up, my relationship with my family was always complex, particularly with my older brother. Despite my efforts to feel genuinely happy for him, his arrogance often overshadowed my admiration. Gifted in many areas, he had a way of positioning himself as the center of attention, which only amplified his brash demeanor. He didn't hesitate to tease or bully me, making our relationship tense. When he left for college, I felt an undeniable sense of relief. This dynamic was further strained when my parents divorced during my middle school years. Their marriage had been fraught with tension for as long as I could remember, and while they put on a united front in public, their unhappiness at home was palpable. Their split was triggered by my mother's affair with a college friend, which led to a bitter and contentious divorce. Despite the circumstances, my father agreed to shared custody. The aftermath of the divorce was challenging. My father began drinking more heavily, and his relationship with me grew increasingly distant, especially after I chose to maintain a friendly relationship with my mother and her new husband. My brother, on the other hand, sided completely with my father, often vocalizing his disdain for my mother and stepdad. This created a deep rift between us, as I sought to navigate a middle ground. A few months after the divorce, my mother remarried. I stood as a bridesmaid at her wedding, but my brother refused to attend. Despite his resentment, he was still required to spend half of each month with our mother, per the custody agreement, a situation he bitterly opposed. Unlike my father, my mother treated us equally, which my brother struggled to accept. For someone so accustomed to being the center of attention, the perceived loss of favoritism was difficult for him to process, leading to frequent outbursts. My father, believing my brother was being mistreated by my mother and stepfather, made several attempts to gain full custody. However, his claims lacked evidence and were ultimately unsuccessful. Over time, these battles only served to deepen the divisions within our family. Reflecting on my wedding day, I can't help but see how my father's absence, and the reasons behind it, are emblematic of the larger dynamics that have shaped our family. While I strive to move forward with grace, this event has left me grappling with the weight of old wounds, the complexity of familial love, and the ever-present challenge of finding balance in relationships marked by conflict and history. I felt a sense of relief knowing my mother truly cared for me and that my stepfather was a kind and decent man. As a child, I struggled with conflicting emotions about my mother's affair, which ended her marriage to my father. Over time, I chose to focus on my happiness and maintained a close relationship with her, a decision I would cherish even more after losing her to cancer 4 years ago. The time we spent together became precious memories, and I came to appreciate her unwavering love despite the complexities of her personal life. In her final days, my brother visited rarely, but he made an effort to be there toward the end, bringing her some comfort. After her passing, my stepfather moved out of state, though we stayed in touch. A year later, my brother relocated to London for a job, visiting our father annually, and our communication dwindled to nearly nothing. As the years passed, the dynamics in my family began to shift, particularly between my father and me. He apologized for his distant behavior after the divorce, admitting that he had felt betrayed and hurt. He also confessed to favoring my brother, which strained our relationship. We agreed to work on improving our bond, and to my surprise, it began to heal. The change was so profound that I asked him to walk me down the aisle at my wedding, and he agreed. Despite this progress, I always felt like a secondary concern to my father, especially when my brother was around. My father's efforts to connect with me only seemed to happen in my brother's absence, a pattern that became glaringly obvious with a recent incident. He asked me to postpone my wedding so he could go on a last-minute camping trip with my brother. Hurt and frustrated, I called my stepdad and asked him to walk me down the aisle instead. My stepdad, who had been a supportive presence during my mother's funeral, hesitated at first, aware of the tension this could cause with my father. Eventually, he agreed. As my wedding day approached, my father became increasingly distant, preoccupied with my brother's visit. On the big day, he was absent, a painful yet unsurprising reality. I held out hope he might arrive at the last minute. But that hope faded as I walked down the aisle with my stepdad by my side, a moment that was both joyful and bittersweet. Later, I sent my father a photo from the ceremony, showing my stepdad escorting me. Hours passed without a response, but as the evening wound down, he unexpectedly appeared, exhausted and apologetic. He admitted he regretted not prioritizing my wedding and suggested holding a second ceremony so he could walk me down the aisle. His plea left me torn between hope for a new beginning and frustration over his thoughtlessness. As we spoke, it became clear his regret wasn't entirely about missing my wedding. It was also about being outshone by my stepdad. His desire for a second ceremony seemed driven more by pride than genuine care for me. Disappointed, I told him I wouldn't rearrange my special day for his benefit. His tears and apologies followed, but they couldn't erase the years of neglect and the hurt he caused with his choices. I stood firm, recounting the many times he had let me down, and explained why I couldn't overlook this latest betrayal. Despite his emotional display, I couldn't ignore the pattern of his behavior. My stepdad's presence at my wedding had been an act of love and support, while my father's was a history of performative affection and empty promises. Eventually, I left him outside, retreating to the peace of my home. He and my brother departed shortly after. In the time since that day, I've reflected on what happened. While part of me feels regret for the harsh words and the pain they caused, I find comfort in knowing I stood up for myself. My decision to have my stepdad walk me down the aisle wasn't just a reaction to my father's absence. It was a recognition of who had genuinely been there for me. Throughout my life, I've made countless excuses for my father's actions, but I've reached my limit. His behavior is inexcusable, and I no longer feel obligated to forgive him. It's painful to confront the truth about someone you love, but everyone has their breaking point. For years, I endured his neglect silently, hiding the tears he caused. Now, I'm finally prioritizing my own well-being, even if it means leaving him behind. I've made the difficult but necessary decision to cut off contact with my father for now, a choice I feel justified in making. My husband supports me fully, though he made it clear he wanted this decision to be entirely my own. I also shared my concerns with my stepdad, worried that I had unintentionally used him as a pawn in my issues with my father. He reassured me, acknowledging the strength of our relationship, which brought me comfort. To anyone concerned about my stepdad's feelings, he has expressed no resentment, which eases my mind. In the days since my wedding, my father has reached out repeatedly, but I've chosen not to respond. I haven't read his messages, preferring to focus on the upcoming honeymoon and this new chapter of my life. When he called again this morning, I considered checking his messages, but decided against it. I didn't want his words to disrupt the peace I'm trying to build as I embark on this special journey with my husband. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I reviewed the messages. They were heartfelt and apologetic, each conveying his regret for failing as a father. He admitted he had favored my brother over the years and acknowledged the validity of my grievances. He expressed a desperate desire to mend our relationship, calling me his only remaining biological child and pleading for forgiveness. While his words stirred up complex emotions, I had already decided that I needed distance to heal. I called him back to make my position clear. He answered immediately, beginning to apologize, but I interrupted. I explained that his constant calls and messages were not helping. They only reopened wounds I was trying to close. I told him I was about to leave for my honeymoon and needed space. I promised to reach out when I was ready to reconnect, but until then, I asked him to respect my boundaries and refrain from contacting me. He agreed, hiding any hurt in his voice, and the conversation ended on a quiet, yet definitive, note. By the third day of my honeymoon, I was finally starting to feel at ease, but my peace was disrupted by an unexpected call from my brother, who used a burner phone to reach me. Initially, I wanted to hang up as soon as I heard his voice, but his accusations of me being an escapist kept me on the line. He criticized my treatment of our father, demanded I apologize, and lectured me on the importance of family. He argued that our father would always be part of my life and that my stepdad could never replace him. His words felt juvenile, as though we were still children caught in the fallout of our parents' divorce. When I explained this was a matter between me and our father, he insisted it affected the entire family. He claimed I had ruined his visit and cut short their camping trip, accusing me of acting out of jealousy. I told him his accusations were baseless and immature, pointing out that despite his professional success, he seemed stuck in our childhood dynamics. Before he could respond, I ended the call, feeling both a sense of relief and frustration. After returning from my honeymoon, I decided it was time to confront the lingering issues with my father. I visited him, surprising him and my brother, who was also present. Ignoring my brother's habitual interference, I requested a private conversation with my father, and after some reluctance, he agreed. I expressed my disappointment in his recent behavior, particularly his request to reschedule my wedding for a camping trip. I reminded him of the progress we'd made in our relationship over the years and how his actions had undermined that progress. I also questioned whether his absence stemmed from genuine priorities or a sense of competition with my stepdad. The conversation was difficult but necessary. My father expressed deep regret for missing my wedding, and I reassured him that dwelling on the past wouldn't help either of us. I told him I wasn't ready to sever ties permanently. Losing my mother to cancer taught me how fleeting life can be, and despite my father's faults, I still cherish the good memories we've shared. However, I also emphasized that I needed time to heal. I explained that rebuilding our relationship would take time, possibly weeks, months, or even years, and I needed him to respect my space in the meantime. He agreed, asking if he could hug me before I left. We shared a brief, emotional embrace, and I managed to hold back tears until I was alone in my car. This isn't an ending, but rather a pause, a chance for both of us to reflect, heal, and decide how to move forward.
Ending our marriage was undoubtedly the right decision. You and your child remain as pitiable as ever. Despite earning $200,000 a year, my ex-husband seems more interested in boasting about himself than addressing our situation. He introduces me to his new wife, Harriet, leaving me bewildered about his thought process. As I attempt to leave, my ex-husband blocks my path and questions whether my apparent jealousy stems from their perceived happiness. His condescending remark about my financial status doesn't sit well with me. Feeling a mix of disgust and exasperation, I maintain my silence. However, my son Johnny intervenes, suggesting that we fire this guy. Fast forward to the present. I am Lisa, 42 years old, married to George, a former co-worker since I was 26. After working and quitting when I became pregnant, I contemplate returning to the workforce as Johnny begins elementary school. George, eager for me to find employment, is persistent in his suggestions and preferences for my work hours. Although initially supportive, George's true colors begin to show when I start a part-time job. A few months into my new job, a shocking message arrives on my phone from a former colleague, revealing my husband's affair with a woman from our company, the daughter of the division manager. The accompanying pictures leave me deeply shaken. As the gossip unfolds, I decide to respond with thanks and close the messaging app, grappling with the unexpected turn of events. I never fathomed that my husband could be unfaithful, but as I reflected on recent events, everything fell into place. His persistent push for me to work harder, even when childcare arrangements were not settled, now made sense. He likely saw it as an opportunity to have more freedom for his affair. Today, he claims to be on an overnight business trip, but I suspect it's a cover for quality time with his mistress. Confronting him the next day, I couldn't maintain a facade of composure. I presented the incriminating pictures, expecting some form of excuse. However, his response shocked me. Acknowledging his infidelity without remorse, he explained that the woman was the division manager's daughter, and marrying her would secure his promotion. He coldly compared her to me, emphasizing her youth and attractiveness. His lack of guilt and blatant disrespect left me disappointed. Instead of apologizing, he suggested an expedited divorce. Unable to feign indifference, I agreed for the sake of my mental well-being and swiftly settled for child support and property division. With custody of Johnny, he left callously, advising me to scrape by on a single income while he joined the ranks of the wealthy through his impending marriage. Though mentally relieved, daily life posed new challenges. Despite the financial support, my savings were modest, and I had to transition from part-time to full-time work. Johnny's after-school programs became a necessity, adding to the complexity of our lives. The unfamiliarity of a full-time job, coupled with the sole responsibility for housework, made every day a struggle. As the years passed, adaptation became a constant companion. Now, 7 years post-divorce, with Johnny in middle school, life has settled into a rhythm. He can mostly take care of himself, allowing me to reflect on the resilience developed through the challenges and changes life threw our way. I think he's grown into a very responsible boy compared to other boys his age, perhaps because I'm always so busy. He even takes on the responsibilities of cooking and doing laundry for me. Thanks to him, I've been free from housework and childcare, and for the past few years, I've had time for myself. Both my personal and working life are going very well. Now I can say it clearly, I'm certainly glad I broke up with that awful man. If I had continued to be married to him, I wouldn't have this life now. However, one day, while my son and I were shopping at the local mall, I ran into that terrible guy, my ex-husband, George. I didn't notice him, but he started talking to me. "Hey, isn't that you, Lisa? Long time no see. You've really aged. Is that what you say to someone you haven't seen in a while?" A person with normal sensitivity would never say that to a woman. I could tell in an instant that he hadn't grown at all as a person. Within a few seconds of meeting him, annoyance crept in, and I snapped back. "Huh? You're the one who's aged a lot. I didn't recognize you for a moment." Honestly, George had aged a lot. I hadn't seen him for 7 years, but it felt like he aged twice as much. His hair was thinning, and his belly protruded, showing a complete middle-aged figure. I thought talking to my ex-husband was a waste of time, so I tried to walk away, saying, "Oh well, long time no see. But I don't really have anything to say to you. See you later." However, he wouldn't let me go. He stood in my way and started talking nonsense. Hey, don't be so cold. The family is all together again. Let's catch up for a bit. I didn't want to hear anything about his life. If there's one thing I'd like to complain about, it's that he stopped paying child support a few years after our divorce. Child support is not my right, but Johnny's right. The fact that he could talk so openly in front of Johnny, who was owed that money, made me irritated. But George didn't care about my mood at all. He started talking about his recent life, which I didn't want to hear. After our divorce, I remarried. I married the daughter of the manager who was in that picture with me. Oh, he's not a manager anymore. He's an executive now. And I got promoted to manager. I'm definitely winning now. To be honest, I don't care how much George has been promoted. It has nothing to do with me, and I'm not envious. All I thought was, why are you bragging about not paying child support even after being promoted? He's such a cheap man to not even pay a few $1,000s a month, even though he's winning. And to rub it in even more, George continued his bragging. Breaking up with you was the right choice. You and your son still look poor. I make $200,000 a year. In the end, George just wanted to brag about himself. He didn't even try to hear about our lives. I thought that any normal parent would be curious about their child's life. But he didn't even talk to Johnny, who was standing right in front of him. He's really a terrible father. Oh, that reminds me. Let me introduce you. Hey, George called over a woman who was looking at clothes in the distance. The woman came over, and I knew right away who she was. I had seen her in a picture before. It was George's new wife, Harriet. Meet my wife, Harriet. How about that? She's way more beautiful than you, isn't she? He introduced me to his new wife. What was he thinking? This woman stole my husband when we were married. I'm glad we're apart now. But back then, it was shocking, and I did resent it at the time. I have no good impression of this woman at all. You'd think my ex-husband would know that, even though he's not the brightest, but he must be really looking down on us. He seems not to have the brains to realize even that. Oh, is that all? I don't have time. Bye-bye, I said, feeling extremely unpleasant. Of course, I don't even glance at the woman, let alone greet her. Wait a minute. As I was about to leave, he blocked my path again. I wanted to leave the scene as soon as possible so I wouldn't retort, but my ex-husband stood in front of me, blocking my path. Stop it. There's no point in hearing about your home life. Jealous because we look happy. You're not just poor in money. Don't be bitter in your heart too. You'll only get more miserable. My ex-husband arbitrarily decides that I'm unhappy. Mind your own business. I'm perfectly happy, so leave me alone. The most unfortunate thing lately is being spoken to by you. Even though I say I'm happy, my ex-husband doesn't believe it at all and arbitrarily worries about my situation. Well, happiness varies from person to person, but being poor isn't happy. Don't push yourself. It's probably impossible for you to remarry with those conditions. I'm worried about you as your ex-husband, you know. Saying that, my ex-husband's face showed an expression completely opposite to concern. He's making a complete fool of me. When I looked at the face of my ex-husband's wife standing next to him, she was also smirking, looking like she's making fun of me. I'll never be friends with this woman. She feels good by looking down on people. She's the worst kind of woman. You'd think my ex-husband would know that, even though he's not the brightest, but he must be really looking down on us. He seems not to have the brains to realize even that. Oh, is that all? I don't have time. Bye-bye, I said, feeling extremely unpleasant. Of course, I didn't even glance at the woman, let alone greet her. As I was about to leave, he blocked my path again. I'll tell you, we're still in love, so the chance of getting back together is 0. Don't get your hopes up for something wrong. My ex-husband seems to be having some wild delusion. He thinks I'm still attached to him, even though it's been 7 years since our divorce due to his affair. His head is so full of fantasies that I can't say anything. When I was at a loss for words because of my ex-husband's ridiculous delusion, he seemed to think he was right. Hey, too shocked to say anything? Being a popular man is tough. What's popular about a middle-aged man's appearance? I'm past anger and starting to feel sick. When I was silent, my ex-husband tried to say something more, but Johnny interrupted him. Mom, can you fire this guy? Huh? My ex-husband was dumbfounded by Johnny's incomprehensible words. It seems that Johnny is very angry, calling me this guy instead of Dad. Well, it doesn't matter, but what do you mean? I'm not getting fired, am I? You're in middle school now. Study properly. He talked down to Johnny too. It's unforgivable that he's making fun of my beloved son as well. I was about to explode with anger at my ex-husband when I heard a voice calling me. Hey, what's going on here? A man came over calling out. My ex-husband froze when he saw the man's face. Why are you here, boss? My ex-husband asked the man in front of him. I'm just here shopping with my family. Are you saying I shouldn't be here? No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way, but I was just wondering why you were talking to my ex-wife. Oh, that's natural. She's my current wife, after all. What? Her. No, this is your wife, boss. I can't believe. Actually, about 3 years ago, I remarried with the CEO of my deceased husband's company, with whom I had lost my wife. The CEO and I became close after my divorce when he approached me while I was shopping at the supermarket. Since I had previously worked at the same company as my ex-husband, I knew the CEO. The CEO knew that my ex-husband had an affair with the head of his department's daughter, leading to our divorce, and that he later married her. It seemed that the CEO was quite bitter about this as a fellow man. But he thought he couldn't meddle in an employee's private life until he saw me at the supermarket and impulsively spoke to me. I was very surprised since I knew the CEO, but I didn't think he would remember my face and name as just an ordinary employee. Perhaps he remembered me easily because I worked at the reception desk of the company. It seems your marriage didn't work out, but I'm sure you'll find someone better soon. CEO, I'm glad you remember me, but you don't have to worry about me. I'm fine. At that time, I had been divorced for less than a year, so I was somewhat putting on a brave face. But the CEO, with his vast life experience, saw right through my act and comforted me with kind words. Divorce takes more than 3 times the effort of marriage. Even if you divorce smoothly, it's tiring. I've never been divorced, but I felt utterly unmotivated when I lost my wife to death. When a man and woman who once loved each other part ways, that's just how it is, so you don't need to put on a brave face. The CEO knew the loneliness of ending a married life. Indeed, while I was glad to have separated, I was also feeling a whirlpool of emotions like loneliness and emptiness at the time, so his words touched my heart. If talking to someone like me helps, call me anytime. I'll treat you to dinner whenever you like, he said, handing me his business card. I thought it would be too bold to contact him for about 2 years, but as time passed, I calmed down and wanted someone to talk to again, so I finally decided to call the CEO. Despite his busy schedule, the CEO made time for me and treated me to dinner. When I was an employee, the CEO was still a department head, and he had an unapproachable aura since he was the previous CEO's son. But once we had dinner together, I found him easy to talk to, like a nice uncle. Perhaps because I was no longer an employee, the CEO and I quickly became good drinking buddies. Then, about a year passed, and the CEO proposed to me with a serious look. You're kidding, Steve? Don't joke like that. I was told while drinking, so I thought it was a joke, but the CEO was serious. At first, I wanted to encourage you after your divorce, but being with you really calms me down. I haven't felt this way since I lost my wife. Honestly, I feel like I'm the one being healed now. If you're willing, let's spend the rest of our lives together. Give me a day to think about it, I said and consulted with my son. I don't mind. You should decide based on whether you like him or not, Mom. Since there was no particular opposition, I decided to marry the CEO. To be honest, I liked him. I thought he was just a drinking buddy. But I also felt truly healed when I was with him. We both felt comforted, so I thought there was no obstacle to living together. And when I heard the story about the president's deceased wife, I really understood that he loved her. Every time I heard that story, I thought about how happy. The aftermath of encountering my ex-husband at the shopping mall took an unexpected turn, leading to revelations and consequences I hadn't foreseen. When I revealed to my ex-husband and his wife that I had remarried the president of my deceased husband's company, their reactions were shock and disbelief. My ex-husband's demeanor changed, and he attempted to smooth things over, but it was clear that the president took Johnny's words seriously, especially given rumors about my ex-husband's behavior in the company. The president decided to investigate the matter further, despite my ex-husband's attempts to dissuade him. Even his wife couldn't prevent the investigation from proceeding, although she tried to distance her father from the situation. As the investigation unfolded, it revealed a pattern of misconduct including harassment, verbal abuse, favoritism, and exploitation of their positions for personal gain. My ex-husband and the executive faced demotion and relocation to a branch office. Eventually, they resigned from the company and faced legal repercussions, including lawsuits from employees they had mistreated. The downfall of my ex-husband and his wife's deteriorating marriage underscored the importance of living honestly and treating others with sincerity. Meanwhile, life continued for me and my family. Despite being 42, I welcomed a healthy baby, and Johnny embraced his role as a big brother with love and care. Looking at my newborn's peaceful face, I felt a sense of gratitude and determination. Despite the challenges of raising another child at my age, I was committed to working hard for my family's well-being and future. As I faced each day, I carried with me a deep sense of gratitude for the new life that had entered our world.
I can't eat homemade food made by poor people like you. I prefer high-end sushi. Her words cut through the air, halting me in the middle of preparing dinner. Poor people, you said? I repeated, trying to make sense of her sharp, mocking tone. Her voice carried a hint of a smile, making her insult sting even more. I placed my hand on the kitchen counter, momentarily at a loss for words. Someone like you as a mother-in-law is the worst, she continued, her words dripping with disdain. But I'm trying to bear with it because your son is an elite, and your husband runs a company. Her casual cruelty hung heavy in the room, sucking the warmth from the atmosphere. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Years of hard work and dedication to keep this family together, dismissed with a single sentence. Yet, I held on, trying to believe there was more to her than the arrogance she displayed. Then, my husband, David, who had been silently observing, finally stood up. With just one word, he silenced the room, leaving us all frozen in place. My name is Lisa Scott. I live with my husband, David, and our 2 sons, James and Adam. I've spent most of my life as a stay-at-home mom, committed to raising my children. Perhaps my devotion to family stems from my own childhood, one marked by the absence of stability and love. When I was just 3, my parents divorced. My mother took me in, working tirelessly to provide for us. Despite her efforts, we lived in poverty. Dinner was often the same meal night after night, and exhaustion etched itself into my mother's face. Yet, she never let her struggles overshadow her love for me. She celebrated my smallest victories and always found a way to make me feel cherished. But her health couldn't keep up with the endless sacrifices. When I started elementary school, she fell gravely ill. Unable to work, she could no longer support us. The financial strain was too much, and I was sent to live in a children's home. Life at the home was challenging, filled with children from all walks of life. I learned independence, resilience, and the painful value of family. Those experiences shaped me, teaching me to treasure every moment with my loved ones. When I married David, we didn't have much, but we were happy. He started his business around the time I was pregnant with James. It was a slow start, but we made it work, always prioritizing family time. Over the years, his hard work paid off, the business flourished, and we were able to provide a comfortable life for our sons. James was ambitious and studious, earning a place at a prestigious university and later a job at a top company. Adam, our younger son, excelled in sports and earned a soccer scholarship. I still remember James's excitement when he shared his success. "Mom, Dad, I did it. I got in." My husband and I were so proud, knowing that his determination and hard work had paid off. As our sons thrived, I felt like our family had reached a beautiful harmony. That's why, when James introduced Mary to us, I wanted so badly to welcome her with open arms. Mary was tall, elegant, and carried herself with confidence. Her cheerful demeanor and engaging conversation instantly put me at ease. She spoke passionately about her career in interior design, and I found myself genuinely admiring her ambition. For a moment, I thought of her as the daughter I never had. She fit into our family so naturally, until I glimpsed a side of her I hadn't expected. When James stepped away to use the bathroom and David took a call, Mary's demeanor shifted, the warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, critical gaze. Concerned, I asked, "Are you okay?" She blinked, her expression tightening. "What do you mean?" "It's just, your expression changed," I said cautiously. "Oh, it's nothing," she replied dismissively. Then, gesturing to the dessert I had served, she said, "Where did you get this cake? It tastes so cheap." I was taken aback. "Excuse me?" She smirked. "I have a favorite bakery. Next time, I'll bring something from there. You won't want to eat anything else after that." Her tone was laced with condescension as she poked at the cake with her fork. Her words lingered, leaving me unsettled. The cheerful, polite Mary from earlier seemed like a distant memory. I was surprised and a bit hurt by Mary's earlier words, but I decided to stay silent. When James returned from the bathroom and David finished his call, Mary's demeanor shifted as if nothing had happened. Her expression brightened, her cheerful tone returning effortlessly. I chose not to bring up the unsettling moment, but a sense of unease lingered. Later that evening, Adam arrived home. "I'm back," he called, sounding tired. "Welcome back, Adam. You're late. Everything okay?" I asked, watching him closely. "Yeah, just a long day," he replied, his tone weary as he walked into the living room. Mary stood up, her enthusiasm bubbling over. "Nice to meet you. I'm Mary. I've heard so much about you from James." Adam offered a polite but tired smile, extending his hand for a handshake. "Nice to meet you too," he said, his voice cordial but distant. We all sat down at the table again. James and Mary carried most of the conversation, while Adam remained quiet, only speaking when directly addressed. "You play soccer in college, right? What position?" Mary asked, trying to engage him. "Forward," Adam replied curtly. "That's so cool. Soccer must require a lot of teamwork." "Yeah, it does." Despite her efforts, Adam's responses stayed brief. Mary didn't seem bothered and moved the conversation back to herself. "I was in the volleyball club in college. Team unity is everything, don't you think?" "Yeah, I guess," Adam said, clearly uninterested. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Suddenly, Adam stood up. "Hey, where are you going?" James asked, sounding annoyed. "I'm tired. I need some sleep," Adam replied, irritation creeping into his voice. "That's rude. Mary's here, and you're just leaving?" Adam shrugged. "I don't think it's rude. Good night." As Adam walked out, Mary's warm expression flickered. She glared at his back and clicked her tongue, a subtle but telling gesture. My stomach tightened. Was there something more beneath her cheerful facade? Mary quickly regained her composure. "It's been a long day. I think I'll head home now," she said, her voice light again. After seeing James and Mary off, I turned to David. "What do you think of her?" "She seems cheerful and nice," he said thoughtfully, but Adam's behavior was unusual. "He's not usually like that." "I noticed too," I said, my voice quieter. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but something feels off." David gave me a reassuring look. "Let's give it some time. Everyone feels things differently." That night, the house was quiet. As I sat on the sofa reflecting on the evening, Adam walked in. "Mom, can I talk to you?" "Of course," I said, gesturing for him to sit beside me. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "That girl, Mary, I don't think she and I get along. James likes her a lot, but I just don't get a good feeling about her." "Why do you feel that way?" I asked gently. "It's not anything specific," he admitted, "just a feeling." I nodded slowly. "I understand. Sometimes, gut feelings matter." He looked relieved. "She smiles, but I feel like there's something else behind it." "I felt it too," I confessed, not to speak ill of her, "but there's something unsettling about her. I don't want to upset James, but I can't ignore it either." Our conversation lasted a while, with Adam expressing his unease. His concerns mirrored my own, and and I felt more justified in my cautious approach. The next morning, tension hung over breakfast. When Mary's name came up, Adam's expression hardened. "James, what do you even see in her? Stop it, Adam," James snapped. "Why do I have to explain myself to you? Come on, it's weird. Mom feels it too." "I don't care what Mom said," James shouted. "I like Mary." Their argument escalated until I intervened. "Enough, both of you. That's no way to talk to each other." Adam calmed down, though his face remained stormy. James stayed upset, but I tried to ease the tension. "Adam, it's important to respect James's choice, but James, we can't dismiss how Adam feels either." "Fine," Adam muttered, backing off. As breakfast ended, the mood lightened slightly, but Adam's worried expression stayed with me. Despite the tension, James and Mary eventually got married. For their first holiday as newlyweds, they planned to stay over, and I prepared a feast to celebrate. When they arrived, Mary's eyes lit up at the sight of the spread. "Wow, this looks amazing. I've never seen such a feast before." "Thank you," I said warmly. "I made this to celebrate your marriage." "Thank you so much. I feel so blessed," Mary said, smiling sweetly. Her words eased some of my doubts, and we began eating together. However, as we cleaned up after the meal, Mary's tone shifted again. "These plates are a bit old, aren't they?" she said, her voice laced with condescension. "These plates have been with us since we got married. They're full of memories," I explained. "Oh, I see," she said with a faint smirk. "Or maybe you just can't afford new ones?" Her words stung. "Mary," before I could respond, she whispered coldly, "you should serve sushi next time. I can't eat homemade food made by poor people like you." I froze, her words hitting harder than I expected. This wasn't the Mary James saw. This was someone else entirely. I was stunned by Mary's words and the cold stare she gave me. "Poor people? Did you really say that?" My voice rose before I could stop it, drawing the attention of James, Adam, and David. "It's nothing," Mary said quickly, trying to brush it off. But I couldn't let it go. "You called us poor, didn't you?" She clicked her tongue, a look of disdain crossing her face. "So, the mask slips," Adam said, glaring at her. "Why did you even marry James? You're just after his and Dad's money, aren't you?" "Calm down, Adam," James said, stepping in. "Don't be ridiculous. Mom's just imagining things." "Imagining? Didn't you hear what she said to Mom? How can you defend her?" Adam shot back, the tension between the brothers rising. "I said it as a joke," Mary interjected with a dismissive wave. "No need to make such a big deal out of it." "A joke?" I said, my voice steady but firm. "Mary, even as a joke, that's not something you should say. Words like that hurt." Mary rolled her eyes. "Fine, sorry if you're all so sensitive." "Sensitive?" Adam was furious now. "This isn't about sensitivity, it's about respect. Do you even care about James or this family?" Mary sighed dramatically, as though she were tired of the entire exchange. "Of course, I care about James. Why else would I marry him?" Adam wasn't convinced. "Then why say things like that about his family? If you cared, you wouldn't be so disrespectful." "I was just being honest," Mary said, her tone sharpening. "James told me himself how hard your mom's life was growing up. I'm just stating the obvious. She's strong, sure, but having someone like her as a mother-in-law isn't exactly ideal." Her words cut deep, and I saw the shock on James's face. "Mary, what are you saying?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I'm saying the truth, James. You're an elite, your family isn't exactly on the same level, but I thought I could overlook that because of you," she said, her voice cold and unapologetic. "And honestly," she added, glancing at Adam, "he's more my type anyway." Adam's chair scraped loudly as he stood, his fists clenched. "That's enough." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy. My husband, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, his voice calm but commanding. "Mary, I think it's time you left." "What? Why?" Mary looked genuinely surprised. "I've tolerated a lot for the sake of peace, but insulting my family crosses a line," he said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling your father. He needs to know what's happened here." "Wait, what?" Mary stammered, but my husband didn't waver. Minutes later, the doorbell rang, and David went to answer it. Mary's parents entered the living room, her mother looking nervous while her father, Larry, appeared calm but firm. "What's going on here?" Larry asked, his gaze shifting between us and his daughter. "Your daughter has crossed a line," my husband said. "She insulted my family, and it's clear she has no respect for us." "Mary?" Larry turned to her, his tone heavy with disappointment. "What did you say?" I didn't do anything wrong, she protested. Don't lie to me, Mary, he said sternly. Tell me the truth. Mary hesitated but didn't respond. Her mother tried to defend her. Larry, let's not jump to conclusions. Enough, he cut her off. Mary, you've embarrassed this family. If you can't respect James's family, you have no place here. Dad, you can't mean that. Mary's voice cracked as the weight of his words hit her. I do, Larry said firmly. It's time for you to grow up. You'll learn the value of respect and family when you're on your own. Tears streamed down Mary's face, but Larry didn't relent. You're leaving with me today, and until you can apologize and prove you've changed, you're not welcome here. Mary and her parents left soon after, the atmosphere in the house heavy with unresolved tension. James sat quietly, his head in his hands. I'm sorry, he finally said. I should have seen this sooner. It's okay, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. What matters is that we move forward. In the months that followed, James and Mary finalized their divorce. While it was a painful chapter, it brought our family closer together. James later met Erica, a kind and thoughtful woman who valued family above all else. Their relationship blossomed naturally, and when James introduced her to us, we instantly felt at ease. Years passed, and our family grew with new spouses, grandchildren, and shared memories. We learned that love and respect are the true foundations of family. Watching my grandchildren play in the yard one sunny afternoon, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. We had faced challenges, but through it all, our bond had only grown stronger. Once a woman marries, she's no longer part of the family. Family celebrations are only for family, so leave already. My sister, Amy, said this to me with a sneer, while my mother stood by, telling me to hurry up and go. I had returned to celebrate Amy's coming-of-age ceremony, hoping for some warmth, but my family treated me as an outsider. At that moment, it became painfully clear I was no longer one of them. My chest tightened, but I quickly composed myself. If that's how they feel, there's only one thing I can do, make them regret their words. My name is Sherry, I'm 22 years old, and I've grown accustomed to living on my own. It's been 4 years since I left home after graduating from vocational high school. Life hasn't been easy. I've worked hard to make ends meet. It's not luxurious, but it's the life I chose, and I take pride in supporting myself. Yet, even now, memories from the past linger like shadows. My mother and Amy's actions still weigh on me. The day before my first birthday, my father left us for another woman. My mother never forgave him. Unfortunately, I inherited his features, and because of that, my mother harbored a deep resentment toward me. You're just like him. Seeing your face makes me sick. As a child, I didn't fully understand her words, but I felt the cold stares, the disdain. To her, I was nothing more than a living reminder of her pain. In the beginning, my grandparents showed me some care, but as my mother leaned on them more and more for financial support, even they began to pull away. By the time I turned 2, my mother had remarried. Soon after, Amy was born, and my mother's new family unit was complete. Without me, I was an outsider. One day, I watched my mother, stepfather, and Amy pack their suitcases. Where are you going? I asked. On vacation, my mother replied curtly. Can I come too? Of course not. We'll drop you off at daycare. Their laughter echoed as they left without me. I was always left behind, sent to a 24-hour daycare while they went on family trips. Each time, I'd watch them leave with smiles on their faces, my heart sinking deeper into loneliness. At home, my mother's rejection became impossible to ignore. I was isolated, invisible to my so-called family. Once, Amy innocently asked my mother, "Why doesn't Sherry get a birthday party?" For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe my mother cared, after all. Celebrate her birthday? My mother scoffed. There's nothing to celebrate. Her words cut me to the core. From that day on, Amy's attitude shifted. She began to look down on me, mimicking our mother's disdain. During family celebrations, I was always sidelined. Amy had birthday cakes and parties, while I had nothing, not even a candle to blow out. When I entered high school, I faced yet another blow. My family refused to pay for my education. Attending vocational school and working to support myself felt like an escape. Being outside, earning my keep, was far better than staying in that house. But no matter how hard I tried, Home was still the only place I had to return to. My mother never acknowledged my efforts. At 18, I made the hardest decision of my life. I left. I couldn't take it anymore. I craved freedom. A life where I wouldn't feel suffocated sharing space with my mother, stepfather, and Amy. When I finally left, they didn't show a shred of emotion. Do whatever you want. You're not our problem anymore, my mother said coldly. Those words severed the last fragile bond one had with them. Life on my own wasn't easy. I worked tirelessly to survive, but for the first time, I felt free to live for myself. Yet, even now, at 22, I can't entirely escape their shadow. Memories of my mother and Amy linger, especially with Amy's coming-of-age ceremony approaching. My own ceremony had been non-existent, but I knew Amy's would be lavish, as everything always was for her. One day, I received an unexpected call from my mother. Hearing her voice for the first time in years made my chest tighten. Amy's 21st birthday is next week. You're not coming, right? She said bluntly. I was stunned. Why would she even think to call me? I wasn't invited. I managed to reply. Good. It'd be awkward if you showed up, she said, her words cutting through me like a knife. After the call ended, a weight settled over me. I whispered to myself, of course I wouldn't go, but the suffocating ache in my chest didn't go away. I thought I had moved on, that I'd severed all ties with them, but why did they still have this hold over me? I told myself I wouldn't let them control me anymore, but the past is a stubborn thing, it refuses to let go. Yet, amidst the pain, I felt a faint desire to confront it, to confront them. Especially Amy. Despite everything, I wanted to celebrate her milestone, so I bought a cake and a gift and decided to visit my family for the first time in years. Standing in front of the familiar door, my heart pounded. It had been so long, and I was terrified of what awaited me. When I rang the doorbell, Amy answered. Her voice was sharp and mocking. Who's there? Amy, it's me, I said cautiously. Stop joking, I brought a cake. Please, open the door. After a moment of silence, the door swung open. Without a word, Amy snatched the cake box from my hands and, to my shock, threw it back at me. The box hit the ground, the cake splattering across the floor. What are you doing? I asked, my voice trembling. I can't eat food from a stranger, she sneered. Stranger. The word struck me harder than I expected. Deep down, I had hoped that despite everything, she still saw me as her sister, but hearing her call me a stranger made something inside me break. As I stood frozen, my mother appeared, laughing alongside Amy. What were you thinking, coming here? She said, her voice dripping with scorn. Did you come to ruin things? Her words stung, and I felt a wave of regret wash over me. Why is she even here? My stepfather's voice called out from the living room. She's not family anymore. My voice trembled as I asked, am I not family? Why? My mother scoffed. Of course you're not family. We're not even related. Amy laughed, her voice cruel. Did you really think you were one of us? Their words crushed me. I had always known I didn't belong, but hearing it said so plainly tore me apart. Clean up that mess before you leave, my mother barked, gesturing to the ruined cake. Numbly, I obeyed. As I cleaned, Amy and my mother laughed mockingly behind me. She brought the cake and now she's cleaning it up herself, Amy said, pathetic. Their laughter echoed in my ears, but I focused on finishing as quickly as possible. When I was done, I turned silently to leave. Leaving already? Should have never come, huh? Amy taunted. I didn't respond. As I stepped out the door, Amy called out one last time. Don't come back, stranger. Her words echoed in my mind as the door slammed shut behind me, sealing the final chapter of our relationship. I realized I had been clinging to a false hope that something might change, that somehow, they might see me differently, but I was wrong. I was nothing more than a stranger to them, and maybe I always had been. It was time to stop wasting my energy trying to find a place in their lives. I already had a place where I truly belonged. That place was with my husband, Don. I met Don through a mutual friend, and from the moment he came into my life, everything changed. I had never thought I would get married. I didn't believe I deserved a family of my own, but Don saw me for who I was, accepted me completely, and never judged my complicated family history. When I shared my painful memories with him, he simply listened. You didn't get to choose your family, he said gently, but none of that is your fault. The family we create together will be your true home. His words warmed my heart, and for the first time, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. With Don, I learned what happiness was. Our life together became my anchor, irreplaceable and full of love. but I had never told my family about him. I didn't want to invite their negativity into our lives. Still, news of my marriage somehow reached them. 3 days after the incident with the cake, my mother called unexpectedly. "I heard you got married. Why didn't you tell us something so important?" Her tone was accusatory, but I remained calm. "I didn't think it was necessary to tell you," I replied. There was a long silence on the other end. "Fine, do whatever you want," she said at last. "You'll end up alone anyway." This time, her words didn't hurt me. I had expected them. Instead, I felt reassured, knowing how happy I was with my new life. I wasn't alone, I had Dawn, and together we were building a family rooted in love and mutual respect. Her bitter remark was meaningless. It couldn't change my happiness. That phone call marked the final break between us. Or so I thought. 3 days later, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened the door, I was stunned to see Amy standing there. How had she found my address? Still, I invited her in. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my guard immediately up. "I just wanted to see what kind of guy you married," she said with a playful tone that put me on edge. As soon as she entered the living room, her eyes locked on Dawn. "This is your husband? Not bad at all. How did someone like you snag him?" I clenched my fists, anger simmering, but I stayed silent. Dawn, however, remained composed. "I'm Sherry's husband. Please stop with the unnecessary remarks," he said calmly. Amy looked surprised by his directness, but quickly recovered. She stepped closer to Dawn, her smile turning sickly sweet. "Don't be so stiff. Let's have some fun. Sherry won't mind, will she?" I was shocked by her audacity, but Dawn didn't waver. "I'm not interested. My happiness is with my wife," he said firmly. "Please stop this behavior." A wave of gratitude washed over me for Dawn's unwavering loyalty. Amy shrugged, her smile fading into a cold smirk. "Whatever. I don't care about your happiness anyway," she said with a dismissive tone. Her faint indifference made my next steps clear. "You don't need people like her in your life, Sherry," Dawn said softly after she left. "For your sake, and ours, it's best to cut ties." His words mirrored my own thoughts. Amy and the rest of my family had no place in the life I was building anymore. It was time to let go. That visit was a turning point. For years, I had been sending money to my family. I had paid for Amy's tuition and even helped with the mortgage on their home, all in the hope that they might someday accept me as part of the family. But after Amy's visit, I realized I owed them nothing. They had taken all I had to give and returned only scorn. Now, I chose to give my energy, my love, and my support to the family I was creating with Dawn, a family built on kindness, respect, and unconditional love. It was time to stop looking back and start living fully in the present. I decided it was time to stop the financial support. When I told Dawn, he gave me a warm smile and nodded. "That's the right choice, Sherry. You've done more than enough. Now it's time to focus on yourself." His words lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Cutting off the money felt like reclaiming my freedom. I filed the necessary paperwork and halted the payments. For the first time, I felt a deep sense of relief. But peace didn't last long. A month later, my routine was shattered by loud, angry banging on the door. When I opened it, my mother and Amy stood there, their faces twisted in fury. "Why didn't the tuition payment go through? The landlord is threatening eviction," my mother spat, her tone accusatory. Their outrage didn't surprise me. I had been expecting this confrontation. Taking a deep breath, I responded calmly. "I stopped the payments because I'm no longer responsible for you." Their expressions shifted from anger to shock. "What do you mean you stopped the payments?" Amy demanded. "I even sold the house to recover what I already paid," I added, my voice steady. "What?" My mother's voice rose. "You sold the house? How could you? You made it clear I'm not part of your family," I said, meeting their glares head-on. "So I have no obligation to support you." "But what about my tuition?" Amy cried. "I can't finish school without it." "That's your responsibility now, not mine," I replied firmly. "I won't fund a family that doesn't include me." "You can't do this. After everything I've done for you," my mother began. "Done for me?" I interrupted, my voice rising for the first time. "You mean the years of neglect and cruelty? I owe you nothing. My decision is final." They tried to argue, their anger quickly turning to desperation, but I stood firm. "You'll regret this," Amy yelled as they left. "You're the worst sister ever." But their words no longer held any power over me. For the first time, I felt truly free from their grasp. A week later, their harassment escalated. They showed up outside my home daily, shouting and causing scenes. They even contacted Dawn's parents in an attempt to shame me. While my in-laws were understanding, they grew concerned. "They've crossed the line," Don said one evening. "You need to take action before it gets worse." At first, I hesitated, but I knew he was right. I gathered evidence from our security cameras and filed a police report. Initially, the authorities treated it as a family dispute and were slow to act, but I persisted. Finally, after another disruptive incident, the police intervened. My mother and Amy were warned to stay away, but they ignored the warnings. Their behavior escalated until the police had no choice but to issue formal restraining orders. Even my neighbors, fed up with the constant commotion, supported my case. Some suggested I move to escape the chaos. Don agreed. "Let's start fresh somewhere new," he said. I couldn't have agreed more. Quietly, we found a new home and relocated. Even after the move, my mother and Amy tried to track us down. They even showed up at Don's parents' house, but my father-in-law firmly shut them down. "Sherry is part of our family now," he said. "If you have issues, they're your responsibility, not hers." Amy tried pleading with my mother-in-law for help, but she was equally resolute. "You made your bed, now lie in it." Eventually, their efforts failed, and they stopped trying. For the first time in years, I felt free. The harassment had drained me emotionally, but once it ended, life became peaceful again. Don and I settled into our new home and focused on building a future together. My in-laws treated me like their own daughter, offering me the warmth and acceptance I had always longed for. "Sherry, your family," they told me one evening, "whatever happens, we'll always be here for you." Their words gave me a sense of security I had never known. Meanwhile, my mother and stepfather's fragile relationship fell apart without my financial support. Eventually, they divorced, and my mother lived a quiet, isolated life. Amy, too, faced the consequences of her actions. A potential marriage fell through when her fiancé learned about her family background and past behavior. Left to fend for herself, Amy struggled to rebuild her life. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to pity them. Their actions had led them to this place. In contrast, my life with Don flourished. We grew closer with each shared experience, facing challenges and celebrating successes together. "We've been through so much, but look at where we are now," Don said one evening as we relaxed in our cozy living room. He took my hand and looked into my eyes. "Let's focus on our future. I want to make you as happy as you make me." His sincerity brought tears to my eyes. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, with someone who truly cared for me. The shadows of my past no longer loomed over me. Don and his family became the family I had always longed for. Their love and support healed wounds I once thought would never mend. Family isn't just about blood, Don's father had once told me. It's about the bonds you choose to nurture. Those words stayed with me. Looking back, I saw my struggles with my mother and Amy as a painful but necessary part of my journey. They had taught me resilience and the value of true family. As Don and I moved forward, I knew I had finally found my home, a place filled with love, stability, and a future worth cherishing.